Khumalo!
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that very theatrical introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the launch of the 2023 Sanlam Transformation Gauge report. My name is Andile Khumalo. I am one of the co-founders of the Sanlam Transformation Gauge, of course, along with our partners, Arena Holdings, and of course, Sanlam. It's been an eventful 3-year journey for those that have been here since day one. We started with what was then a very simple but powerful idea. And the idea is really based on the fact that in South Africa, it's generally accepted that our biggest challenges can probably be summarized in the triple challenge of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And because of these 3 challenges, this makes a broad-based Black economic empowerment as a policy probably one of the most important for South Africa to get right. Otherwise, the divisive construct of having inherited a country of poor Blacks and rich whites will continue long after 1994 and will very well compromise our ability to build a society that we and our children deserve. So 3 years ago, the idea was that we need to ensure that somehow we get this BEE policy right. When it was written, it had big hopes and aspirations, but I think you would all agree with me that in recent times, it's lost its shine. So, and we realized also that if we don't do that, how will we achieve something that we don't measure? Yes, every company measures BEE. Some even win awards for BEE. But who is measuring where South Africa Inc. is? Who's measuring what's working? Who's measuring what's not working? And how do we take all of that and build a more inclusive economy? For example, how do we know if skills development is leading to better employment equity? How do we know if enterprise and supply development programs are leading to more Black and Black women-owned small businesses? And hopefully those small businesses becoming large ones one day. How do we know exactly how much of this economy is owned by its people? So as these questions started coming, it was very clear that somehow we need to build what must be one day the most comprehensive independent study on BBEE in South Africa. Well, I'm proud to say that today, that day has come. We can safely say that the Sanlam Transformation Gauge is exactly that. In 2021, the gauge started with just over 3,000 companies in its sample. In 2022, we grew that number by more than 3 times to 10,000 companies. And this year, in 2023, we have a comprehensive independent research that is based on a sample of 14,542 South African companies. And the importance of having a sizable sample size, of course, is that it brings a lot more credibility to the data that comes out. Now, all of these 14,000 companies are reporting on the basis of what we have picked as 9 sector codes as well as the generic codes. The results this year also have 2 additional features that I'm very excited about. So what you don't know is that our partners, Sanlam, are very active. You know, I've worked with many brands out there, and what brands normally do is they throw money at the problem and give you a logo, not Sanlam. After every single launch of every single installment of the Sanlam Gauge, I would get a call from the chairman of Sanlam, which you'll hear from soon, and he will invite me to a lunch. He makes me pay for it, though. But he does invite me to the lunch, and he gives me feedback. So a while back, in fact, last year to be exact, the chairman of Sanlam challenged us to go beyond the numbers. His feedback was that the numbers are great and they're quite important because at least we are measuring something. But what we need to do is find a way to get into the micro impact of broad-based Black economic empowerment. How do we derive what the lived experience of those people that are supposed to benefit from BBEE actually is? Because more and more we are seeing this disconnect between what the numbers are saying but what the lived experience is. So this year, in the 2023 Sanlam Transformation Gauge, we've included a survey of 42 BBEE verification agencies. Our research partners Intellidex conducted a short survey of just 10 questions that speak volumes about the experience of those that are charged with the responsibility of verifying what companies are actually reporting on their scorecards. Now, that will make great reading as you go through your Sanlam Gauge report this year, which of course looks as beautiful as this. And you will see inside how they respond to some of the questions and some of the really sensitive questions around what really is stopping the pace of transformation in corporate SA. So that should make some great reading for you. In addition to that, our researchers also decided to leave their offices and they went out into the streets, ladies and gentlemen. And what they did is that they compiled case studies of actual people with actual experiences to determine what the actual lived experience is like. So this was going through the different sectors, talking to entrepreneurs, talking to senior executives, all sorts of people that are meant to be benefiting from the different sector codes, and to what extent do they feel that benefit. That is also in the research this year. So we are looking at the numbers, the hardcore numbers, and of course we're comparing that to the case studies. And the real question we're trying to answer there is B-BBEE making the impact that it set out to? So please do yourself a favor, after going through all of the numbers in the research, make sure you go through the case studies. Now, since I know everyone is eager to devour this year's Sanlam Transformation Gauge report, let's get the show on the road. For some housekeeping, let me also tell you that we do have many people joining us online. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to everybody that's joining us on our live stream. I'll let you know that prior to today, we had to take registrations from our live stream. And just to indicate how popular and how important it is for South Africans to get their head around the progress of this policy, Chair, we have over 900 people that have registered to join us online. So you're almost welcome. On your live stream, you will see there's a live chat facility there. So please use that in order to ask your questions and post those questions. Myself and Kgosana Mfupi, who will be moderating one of the sessions, we'll be monitoring what questions come through there, and we'll make sure that we put those questions to our panels as the day goes by. For the audience that's in the room, thank you very much for joining us. It's a full house here at Empire, downtown in Parktown, Johannesburg. You can use the QR codes that are on the screens around the room to also post your questions on the live chat. And of course, when the Q&A comes, you can simply also raise your hands. We'd love to hear from you. We will endeavor, of course, to take as many questions as we can, time allowing. For the social media people, the Twitteratis out there, please use the hashtag Sanlam Gauge for all the posts that you make. I invite you to please take as many pictures as possible. Any quotations, anything that you'd like to share that's coming out in the room, please do share out on the social media platforms. And of course, we track all that traction as well. Right, so to get the show on the road, please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming on stage a gentleman who's the editor of the Business Times. The Business Times is our partner publication. In 2 weeks' time, they will be putting out there on that particular Sunday a full-on report on the Sanlam Gauge, and his job is to put it together every single week. Please put your hands together just to say a few words as we start the day to the editor of the Business Times, Mr. Caiphus Kgosana.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mine is really an easy task to welcome you all to Arena Holdings, literally the home of the Sunday Times, the Business Times, Financial Mail, Business Day, and all of these wonderful publications. And we as Business Times are really very, very proud to be a media partner to the Sanlam Gauge. And as a media platform, we're also a corporate citizen. And we take a keen interest in the overall transformation of our country. But ours is not only to provide, ours is mainly to provide a platform where basically those with better knowledge, those with better tools, those who can conduct this kind of research, we can then give them a platform and amplify their voice. And trust me, we have a megaphone here. I mean, the last time I checked, Sunday, Business Times, mothered by this wonderful brand, the Sunday Times, we have a readership of just under 2 million, of which a good 74% of our readers are black, 89%, sorry, no, not 89, 59% male. There's still some work to do on the gender parity, score there. The majority have either matriculated, have some form of tertiary qualification. 75% of them earn 20,000 and above, which means they're a sizable chunk fall in the 8 to 10 living standards measure bracket. You know, a typical BT reader either works full-time or runs some kind of business, and almost 40% reside in Gauteng. So this is an audience that has a deep interest in the transformation of society, but especially they have a deeper interest in how the corporate sector is transforming as well. So this is an audience that you really, really seek. So with those words, I really need to welcome you, once again to Arena Holdings, and look forward to a fruitful and wonderful engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Caiphus. Thank you so much for welcoming us. And of course, we look forward. And I'm told it's the 30th of July. Eh? That's the Sunday where we'll be getting the special report on the Sanlam Gauge. So not this Sunday coming, but next week. Thank you so much for those words. Special welcome also to the BE Commissioner. I saw him slip in there. Welcome, Mr. Matona. Thank you for joining us this morning. Of course, an important stakeholder to the work that is around broad-based black economic empowerment as the regulator to make sure we all behave. It's always good to have you here, sir. We promised we brought our scorecards and they all comply. Thank you, sir. Of course, ladies and gents, we could not do this project without our headline partners at Sanlam. They've been great partners, like I've already said, a really, really visible and present team. We talked to the marketing team, we talked to the research team, and of course the team that's led by Rayanne Cedris. You'll hear from her a little bit later in the morning in the transformation office. And this project has become a lot more. In fact, it has actually quite never been a sponsorship. It's actually quite an integral part of what Sanlam is all about with their own journey when it comes to transformation. And today we are quite honored to get an address from the non-executive chairman of the Sanlam Group. Please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Elias Masilela.
Good morning. What I've just done is called an Obama. You'll realize that I'm the only one who's been given an ice cream. And the reason for that is so that I don't spend a lot of time on stage. When I got here, I said, I'm going to use my full 67 minutes. And they said, you don't have 67 minutes, you only have 20. So I'm going to share thoughts, this time, fortunately, before anybody says something. In the past, I would comment right at the end. And these thoughts are premised on the 3 years that has been done, on the history of BEE that we've experienced as a country, and on what we would like to see as a company, that being Sanlam. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for participating, particularly those who are online. We would like you to use this opportunity as a base to change thinking and to change decisions that take place in boardrooms across the country. Why are we here? For me, I'm standing here to answer a particular question. A question that has been asked by many South Africans, often asked with frustration and to a growing extent with cynicism. And on the back of this question, people have started to suggest that we need a complete overhaul of the system or even to jettison it. We did not want to engage on this subject with any level of emotion. We wanted to be level-headed, and therefore we chose science. And this is the science that is being delivered by the team that has put together the report for us. The question that I've been asked to answer is BEE still relevant in South Africa? However, there are second order and third order questions that need to be asked before we can answer this question. This can be broken up into 4 parts. What was BEE set up to achieve? What was the problem we're trying to solve for? Has the objective been achieved? Have we solved for this problem? As I go along, you can try and answer those questions in your head and see if we can arrive at the same answer. At Sanlam, we take this exercise very seriously. It's part of the business model. And there's no better time to answer this question than to answer it on this particular date. When I asked them how they chose today, they told me that they are using it to celebrate Madiba. And when I thought back into what Madiba left with us, he left with us a continuous search for an inclusive society and a progressive South Africa. And I decided to use this as a premise for my engagement today. Inclusivity. At Sanlam, we have, at least on the board, we have what we call an inclusivity forum that informs all decisions of the board. It sits side by side with the actuarial and data and IT fora, which are also critical for data making. That gives you a sense of how important we attach inclusivity to the work we do. Now, I would like to take you on a mental journey. In trying to answer the question, I want to use an economic model. Those who have pens can write it down. The objective or the target is achieving economic inclusivity. That is your dependent variable if you're writing the model. It has 3 independent variables, which in turn are dependent on what you are doing today. The first independent variable is equal opportunity, plus equal access, plus equal participation. If you have all those 3 occurring simultaneously, you have economic inclusivity. I will not ask the question whether or not you've seen this occurring in South Africa. But I'll go back and ask the question, why are people wanting the system to change? People are asking for the system to change because they think the system has failed. The policy has failed. The legislation has failed. But it's very interesting to note that in academic literature that looks at institutions, that look at governance, what the literature tells us is it's actually not the institutions that fail. It's the incumbents that fail. We have a very good lesson in South Africa of an experience where we're trying to put together policies over time. And one of the lessons that we came up with is you can have the best policy. You can have the best institutional design. But if it is not accepted and it is not implemented properly, it will fail. We've had gear as an experience which never saw the light of day. We've had inflation targeting, which is still operating today. And the difference between these two is not the institutional designs, but the way in which we implement it. So there's relativity in success that we need to think about as a society. I'm glad Sidiso is here. I'm going to quote what I'm told he said. In the report, it says, he says, it's easy for someone to claim BEE is not working based on an anecdote, just as it is for someone else to claim the policy is successful. There's a lot in that statement that we need to think about. It's a question of relativity and how we actually interrelate with the challenges that we deal with. Coming to the subject of science, where we don't want to be emotional. As Sanlam, we decided to invest in the program that we are presenting today. This is its third year, and incrementally, it's making us understand better about what BEE actually means and what is possible. And I'm hoping that we can use today to engage in a systematic way about what has worked and what hasn't worked, about what we should do as individuals and institutions, and more importantly, about what we did not do and did not say when things were going wrong. I'll take a moment and reflect on the results. I'll not go into the details of this because people are going to deal with them. I'm only going to focus on the policy implication of the results as I engaged with them. The impressive statistic that was given earlier on about a 361% increase in population size is impeccable. And they went ahead and complemented the results with a survey. And that, to me, brings the human element to the numbers. It brings heart to what we're talking about. The numbers also show us that there's been an improvement in the ratings overall between last year and this year. But when you look at the numbers, they are still not exciting. I said this last year, I said this the previous year, I continue to say it today. I believe we can do better. As we observed last year, the only variable that outperforms is in socio-economic development. I made a comment about it last year. I said it is not good enough, and I think I'm justified to say the same thing this year. It is not good enough. If you compare to 2021, it gets worse because some of the figures are worse than what we saw in 2021. Now, those of us who are technical and can argue statistically that these are not comparable, I am not going to engage in that discussion. I'm going to leave it to statisticians to tell us how they splice the numbers to get them to be comparable in the manner in which they presented them. But the indication, whether comparable or not, is that the direction is not what South Africa would like to see. The worst performing of the variables is management control. If you look at the numbers as they stand on their own, there is no problem. We can work on it. But if you go beyond the numbers or behind the numbers and bring in the human element and the experience of people, it is very depressing. A question was asked in the survey whether this poor performance was due to resistance by corporate South Africa, seeing black people in leadership, or a lack of skills, or both? And the result is that 51% of the people surveyed said it's because of resistance. That says to us, attitudes have not changed. Attitudes have not moved. We are still ticking boxes. We are still paying lip service to transformation. We've just come out of an inaugural Africa Impact Investing Summit in Cape Town, which was funded by Sanlam. We had to deal with the same problem, which means it is not only a South African problem, it's a continental problem. That means we need to do something about the psyche. And unfortunately, science also tells us that changing mindset is much more difficult than changing anything else. The work that we have to do is bigger than what we thought it is going to be. In concluding in this part, the Gauge report calls it a mismatch between scorecards and reality. I would want to be more dramatic and say it is actually a mega mismatch. Another observation that came out for me, which I think is very interesting, is that of the differential performance between the listeds and unlisteds. It is very clear that the listeds are performing much better. And this is more important if you think about black ownership and enterprise and supplier development. I asked the question, why is that the case? The answer wasn't clear. But one of the possibilities is that the balance sheets in the listed space are much larger than those in the unlisted space. It then causes me to turn to my own sector, the financial sector. How are we funding? Are we funding properly? And I'm hoping that there are people on the floor that can be able to answer this question for us. As I conclude, because I haven't been asked to present the gauge, I'll try and answer this question that I was asked to answer today at this point. I'll ask you to go back to the model of inclusivity. And when you look at that model again, you will see that none of the independent variables have been realized. That means the independent variable is a bridge too far from us. One would ask the question, why are we at this stage as an economy? Why is BEE so elusive when we believe it's relevant to change our futures going forward? You can think about these on your own, but I've got 4 points that I would like to raise coming out of the survey and also thinking about what happens around us. As I've said, it is not the policy. It's incumbents, it's attitudes, it's racism, it's corruption. And the report goes into detail to deal with the scourge of corruption, and I think they call it the original sin or something like that. What I would then want to leave this gathering with is, let us not deal with the symptoms. Let's deal with the causes or the sources of the problems that bring us where we are. Let us not blame the design, but the manner in which we implement and the conviction with which we implement. Do not throw away the baby with the bath water. Replace the water and make sure that it's cleaner and properly soaped. I hope I have shared some thinking and an approach in dealing with the issue in a systematic fashion, not in an emotional fashion, so that we can find lasting solutions for the economy. I thank you.
Africa, the big continent, known for the big five, big dreams, and an even bigger heart. It's a big world out there, which is why we're using big ideas to make the biggest difference to unify our continent.
We're the biggest insurance and asset management group on the African continent.
Absolutely, Paul. We're driven by a big purpose. We want to make a big impact in the lives of all Africans, helping them achieve their big dreams.
Which is why we've invested more than R1 trillion growing and developing the communities right across the continent with the purpose of creating generational prosperity.
It's why Sanlam believes in making big investments that make the biggest change. It's long-standing partnerships like this that has empowered more than 1 million Africans. Because wisdom is only useful when it's shared with everyone.
More than 70,000 learners benefited from the Blue Ladder Schools program.
So Sanlam have opened their arms as wide as they can to expand financial inclusivity.
93,000 beneficiaries reached through face-to-face consumer education program.
They know no one is ever too small to make a big difference if we are all given the right opportunities.
Job creation through a 2.25 billion rand commitment to see the investor's legacy range.
So Sanlam is making sure there are big opportunities for big partnerships. Which is why they're taking massive steps to help all of us break through to the big time.
Close to 160 million rand invested in enterprise and supply development.
It's little wonder Sanlam is taking such a big amount in the renewable future of Africa.
Almost 32 billion rand allocated to renewable energy, water, sanitation, and oceans infrastructure.
Because Sanlam believes in growing confidence in the greatness of our land and its biggest untapped resource, all its people.
Over 2.8 million people reached through
Sanlam's Consumer Financial Education Awareness Initiatives.
There for you through the big challenges and big changes.
With a big investment of over 5 billion rand to support our clients and communities during COVID-19.
Well done, Sanlam, for being awarded the Top Employers Certification in South Africa for the 8th consecutive year.
Building the lives Sanlam believes every African deserves.
716 million rand invested in public benefit activities by the Sanlam Foundation.
In making all Africans' biggest dreams come true, to live the life they've always wanted. And that's a big deal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Don't throw away the baby with the bath water. Perhaps replace the water with cleaner water and maybe a new bar of soap. And I think that talks to some of the conversations I've certainly had with many role players, including the Office of the BEE Commissioner, about perhaps there coming a time for us to all have a new conversation about where transformation is going, especially because of the mismatch of the experience of those it's meant to benefit and what the scorecards are saying. Speaking of that, I mentioned earlier, and the chairman referred to it, that in this year's research, we've included some case studies. And I just want to quote a case study of this property and construction entrepreneur by the name of Kanye Makaya. Kanye is from Palm Ridge. You guys might know where Palm Ridge is. It's a developed township here in Gauteng, in the east of Joburg. And I just want to read verbatim in the article that's in the report. Recently, Makaya was offered an opportunity to build a commercial property, to lease it out to ShopRite, USave, and USave Liquor in the newly developed township of Palm Ridge, east of Johannesburg. As per the lease, Makaya and her co-developer will have to put up a structure costing between 3 million and 5 million rands. But they are struggling to raise the required capital despite having the lease. In addition, the land on which the property will be built is bought and fully paid for. It's not fancy, just a steel structure with a roof. We've been told no bank will look at it, even though we've always been told that if you have a lease agreement, the bank would look to the lease. But that's not our experience, Makaya says. And of course, she goes on in the story about some of the difficulties. So those are the things that we need to reflect on as a society. That's the purpose of this piece of research, is to highlight what the numbers are saying, but also what is the experience on the ground. Speaking about the experience on the ground, another really, really great initiative that's been around for a couple of years now is the Youth Employment Service. We've seen some of the highlights over the years and some stats being shared, but I don't know if you know, it is the highest impact, lowest cost, and most verified private sector youth employment program there is. And it's affecting broad-based change across many sectors, provinces, and the country at large. It's also a private sector-led initiative. It addresses the country's youth unemployment crisis, and we all know that is a real crisis. And it does so by empowering businesses to create jobs for our unemployed youth. It is youth-focused, and it is business-led. It's a non-profit organization, receives no government funding, and is 100% funded by the private sector. One of the biggest donors is also the Sanlam Group. And the YES program works with leading businesses in various sectors. What it does, it provides a 12-month quality work experience for unemployed young people so that one day they can become these future managers, skilled professionals, and hopefully entrepreneurs as well, who will drive the economy forward. You'd have seen in the research results over the years, this year is no different, that although there seems to be a lot spent on skills development, the management control element of the scorecard doesn't seem to be moving. It's programs such as these that we hope will start moving that needle. Now, for most youth, this program is the first chance of employment that they have in the private sector. This morning, we are quite honored to have this Chief Executive Officer of the Youth Employment Service, just to take us through some of what the program is doing and also some of its achievements. And I'm pretty sure in there, he'll slip in how we can all be part of it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ravi Naidu.
Yes, good morning, Andile, and good morning to you all. And as I walked up, you said, one of three Ravi Naidus. Yes, that is true. You know, in fact, what happened once, I was flown to a destination to give a talk, and when I got there, they found it was someone else. And he had accepted the invitation, so we had to, thanks very much, very good to be here. And thanks very much, Sanlam, for the invitation to this lovely venue and very important topic. Also good to see a lot of old familiar faces from back in the day. Very good to be here. Now, yes, so the Youth Employment Service, or YES, is really about transformation. It's all about transformation, and it's about social mobility. In fact, you could describe it as a social mobility program. Its job is to take young people from very disadvantaged backgrounds and put them into their first work experiences in the private sector and in jobs and careers that will stick in the economy and help the economy grow. That's the theory of change. Take people who otherwise wouldn't get the chance but have potential, give them the chance, they will go on to do things that, and in years to come, they'll be the ones sitting in this room and taking their own life experience and community links to drive transformation forward, to build our sort of fighting force, as it were, to change the country. So that's really what it's about. And of course, we all know, in terms of what the chairman just said earlier, the importance of building a broad base and a sustainable future. It's really getting that pipeline of talented people from very disadvantaged backgrounds. So YES has done about over 100,000 people, of which 60% are coming from social grant recipient households, and they're going into those programs. Now, Andile stole some of my great points I wanted to make, but that's great. But let me just say the kind of jobs that the people are going into are, so we are running the largest drone pilot program in the country. You get a pilot's license, you're flying those heavy drones, we need for all the industries. Not all the jobs are sexy as that, but it's green jobs, solar fitment, ICT. We're actually running a big baristas program with famous brands, Mug and Bean and Steers and all of that. So things which we think have a future. So I think that's really important. I think, even the debates we might have in terms of transformation and BE, I think everyone will agree. The most important endowment you can make for the future is to get young people prepared for the future world of work. So I think that is one thing, no matter what your view on BE, whether you should have it or not have it, what should change, one thing that will always stay the same is how do we prepare young people for the future, because that's where the economy and our tax base and everything else is. Now, and of course, I think as was introduced, we are unique in that we are a private sector funded institution, 100% private sector funded, and that was by design. It comes out of the CEO initiative that YES was created. So when the president and all the rest say to business, what have you done for us lately? One of the things they should say is, yes, we have set up the YES program, which is making a contribution. Now, of course, it's just making a contribution as part of a whole range of things that must be done to deal with those independent variables that you spoke about. But this is an important component of a solution going forward, even as we deal with the big heavyweight issues. Now, what comes through is how does YES work? And then, if we're doing, so we did 32,500 youth came through the program last year, all spending a year in some company or the other. And it was 2.5 billion rand paid by the private sector towards those salaries. I mean, how does it affect the millions of people who are unemployed? So what is the contribution it makes? So I thought, let me just sketch it out in a simple diagram for all of you. So starting on the left, we draw our youth from the national databases that we share with other youth bodies, so we really collaborate. And it's free to go online, it's zero rated, so there's no transport costs and there's no data costs to do your job search. That's called sayouth.mobi. But then corporates like mining houses say, no, they have a particular need in a particular area and they work with particular traditional authorities. Can't we work with them? We said, fine, we can draw youth from those areas. Or we would work in partnership with TVET colleges and a whole range of other places where we think people are good potential who are employable but unemployed. And how do we bring them in? And what YES does, we now engage with the companies. And why do companies join? They join for the BE level up. As Sadisa will tell you, the BE commissioner, you can go up 2 levels on your BE score if you are verified as having done what you said you were going to do and support this youth. So most companies join for that reason. But we find now many companies don't just join for BE. They say, I'm already a level 1. I don't need the BE points so much. Can I join for ESG? Of course, it's a huge social impact program, and we can even make the youth go into solar, which is an E, which is a green job. So many of them join for ESG reasons. Now we know, of course, we must push employment equity transformation. So we have companies joining and say, but now I really want these youth to be in my junior management training programs. Or we have sector-specific programs. So the country's also waking up to the fact that you have to bring youth into play. So the new master plan, for example, on renewables says the more you work with youth and YES, in other words, verified programs support youth, the more you can be incentivized. So there's a whole range of reasons. And then they go into corporates, or they go into some other programs, which I'll describe now. And ultimately, what we want is that drone pilot or that barista goes back into the economy, either setting up their own business or they have an impact in their local communities. So that's really the important thing. So they become, in a sense, the game changers that we need, because our theory of change is that young person who's coming from a social grant recipient household has now made a huge leapfrog jump. They've jumped from multiple generations of time that have taken them to now be running their own business. They've now jumped that space. They go back into the local community and have the impact to grow jobs, find other ways, as I say, to join this room. So we have a good problem at the moment, and which fits in with hopefully what many of you around the room are doing. We find that the 100,000 jobs there, in fact 114,000, about 25% of those jobs, the companies sponsor them but can't host the youth. So they say, Ravi, I've got these 7,000 youth, so that's in total what they'd say to me. We've got 7,000 youth which we have sponsored, but we can't host them. What do we do with them? And now I'm sitting with the situation and our team, which sectors can we channel these really good potential youth to support? Solar fitment, a digital economy, drones. So we are in a situation now where we can channel some of that potential to work in partnership for particular sectors. So I'll just talk in the last couple of minutes with what we're doing on tourism, in fact, where Sanlam is our founding corporate sponsor. And what we are doing there is we are putting a few hundred, we're about to launch a program, we're putting a few hundred youth who are content creators. They're doing the visuals, the websites, the search engine optimization, and so on, for tourism programs to bring tourists into South Africa. Why is that important? It's a hugely employable job that they're getting in different ways, but also it is allowing them to support the retailers, the restaurants, and the accommodation, all the things that build tourism as a country. So I think we are now working, and we're finding that skills organizations are joining us, and donors are joining, and there's a lot of momentum for the sectors. Where do they go in the end? Well, these are just, we have loads and loads of case studies of where these individuals will go on to do fantastic things. One is a drone pilot. We wish him well. He's helping Eskom deal with security. He'll have his own company. The other is a fintech entrepreneur. So at the moment, I'll just say that at the end, about 42% of all the youth are employed. So where they came from to where they are now. And about 15% are setting up their own businesses. And we know they are doing very well. And even those who haven't reached that conclusion, many of them, will go on to do really good things. And that, in conclusion, is how we see ourselves making a contribution to building a stronger economic base. And as the moderator said, we would really love all of you to join us and expand this program, because it's really part of how we drive transformation and social change in South Africa. So with that, let me stop and thank you. There's a clock here which is red at the moment, and I've just made it, so thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ravi. How awesome is that? Another round of applause for yes, please. Yeah, talk about a real solution to a real problem. Thank you so much, Ravi, for that. I also want to recognize, just in the room, there are quite a number of, as you know, the way the space of B-BBEE is organized is that sectors have sector councils for those that have got sector codes. And part of what we do between the reports is that I certainly spend a lot of time interacting with the sector councils. They give us feedback on the research, some of the nuances that we need to pick up on. Some sectors are more engaged than others, which is not always great, but it's nice to have the ones that are engaged. So the agri-BEE sector is here. Mr. Abercrombie is also here. I think his big boss is here as well. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. And also, I have a whole delegation from the MAC Charter Council. That's the advertising and communications team. Here is the chairperson and deputy chairperson, Mr. Angelo Tandi, and also Mr. Mateo Gaba, led by supported by Mr. Sandile Nene, who've just been reconstituted, as you probably know, working on an iteration of the sector code for the marketing, advertising, and communication sector. So it's always nice to have all of the sectors in the room, and I'm pretty sure I'll bump into more that are here. I also want to update you on something really interesting that happened. So I read out that case study earlier on, and I received a message from an executive at ShopRite who's logging online. And they've asked for me to connect them with Ms. Makanya to try and assist on the issue that she's got. This is the kind of work you're never going to get awards for, but you're going to make a difference. So thank you again to the whole team that's involved in this wonderful project. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our final speaker before we take a short break. Mr. Mzwanele Memani, I've known for a few years. He's been working with the Department of Small Business Development, and there he's the Director for Value Chain Support in the department. And they've been doing a lot of work in trying to support small businesses since the department was built. Recently, I attended a session which was a big focus around enterprise and supply development. The BE Commissioner was there himself, and he also gave a talk. And he's going to share with us just some thoughts share some ideas on the role of small business in reducing unemployment and inequality through the successful implementation of B-BBEE. Mzi?
Good morning to everyone, and thank you so much to Sanlam for inviting the Department of Small Business Development to really share some thoughts and initiatives on what we're doing to reduce unemployment using small businesses. Obviously, we do not foresee that small businesses by their own will be able to reduce unemployment. It's definitely going to be an effort where we partner with a whole range of stakeholders. And I think the recent strategy that was published last year, the National Integrated Small Enterprise Strategy, actually proposes that in order for us to take things forward, we do need to partner and foster strong partnerships, and in particular with the private sector. And I think we are very fortunate because other countries that we're learning from have actually walked the road of creating a symbiotic relationship between big and small firms. And I think for us, those case studies, we believe that's what we need to adopt and take forward in order to reduce unemployment and inequality. Of course, in some countries, it wasn't a question of regulation or law that necessitated these companies to introduce what is called economic inclusion. It was part of their responsibility to realize that as citizens of a country, we do need to take a step forward and embrace those that are excluded. I mean, if you look at the models by the United States, they introduced the Supplier Development Program precisely to target minorities in the US. And if you look at various other countries, so there's a model to really create a relationship between big and small firms to be very strong. And in fact, Japan was one of the first countries to really introduce this model of allowing small firms to manufacture components and supply them to the large firm. And the large firm's responsibility was really to do the assembly and distribution to the global markets. So firms, for instance, small firms don't have to stress and worry about distributing their products to international markets. They only have to be perfect and be competitive in what they do and supply big firms. I just want to quote a phrase in the white paper on the promotion of small businesses that was published in 1995. There's a concept that was proposed in 1995, which I don't think as a country we took it to heart. This phrase in the white paper of 1995 said, yet individually, SMMEs often lack the skills. And I think someone posed a question this morning that is it because economic inclusion is not happening because folks lack skills? And so the white paper diagnosed that individually, SMMEs lack the skills and resources to improve their own capabilities. And I think this is very true. And our own analysis is that if small businesses want to operate individually forever, we're not going to see transformation taking place. We're not going to see them having the capability to reduce unemployment and inequality. It's going to continue forever. So what the white paper then proposed was that it is thus essential that fragmented small enterprises within sectors, industries, sub-regions, and other localities be helped to network. So please take note of that word that was proposed there, that these businesses need to network. They need to collaborate. They need to work together. And the methodology that the paper was proposing was clustering. Can we adopt that approach of clustering small businesses so that they can, in order for them to jointly address development obstacles, because when they work together, you're going to learn from each other. You share knowledge, you share information, and you share skills. And as they work together, they address these challenges, they take up opportunities, and to build what is now phrased collective efficiency. And Europe has just over 3,000 clusters across various sectors. And we've just been checking South Africa, how many clusters we have in South Africa. We're not even at 40 clusters in South Africa. And there are just 3 provinces that are dominating clusters. It's the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KZN. And these clusters focus on various sectors. In KZN, you'll have a furniture cluster, you'll have a clothing cluster, a maritime cluster. And what they do, they mobilize small businesses to get together, be capacitated, and get all the support, and most importantly, link them to a lucrative opportunity from a lead firm. And a lead firm in this case is none other than a big company. So it's going back to the philosophy of creating a symbiotic relationship between big and small firms. And I think the feedback and the report we're getting from the South African clusters is really massive. So it is driving those SMMEs that are part of these clustering programs to reduce employment, because we're looking at the turnover they are generating, and we're looking at the employment those businesses are creating. So one advice is small businesses do not have to work individually. They need to work together and collaborate. And secondly, they're not going to do this on their own. Big companies have a role here to play a role. And I think this report from Sanlam Gauge is really giving us a sense that when it comes to enterprise and supplier development, we saw the figure last year where companies were able to achieve roughly about 61% of the target. And there's a slight improvement. I think the chair confirmed that, but that slight improvement is not really leading to even the small firms making a dent to unemployment. So there's definitely going to be a need here for big firms to open up opportunities and integrate small firms to their value chains. And I think as a department, we're very excited to work with large companies that are dedicated to making sure that small businesses play a key role in this economy. And we want to invite more and more companies to join a platform we just launched last year, which is the Enterprise and Supplier Development community of practice. So we're inviting all the corporates to be part of that platform. And so we're excited to date that on the 6th and the 7th of June, more corporates came forward and joined and said, we want to be part of a journey that is going to see transformation in our lifetime. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Memani. I read in the paper that you got a new boss, Mr. Memani. Is that true? I saw a new director general, I think. Okay, so how's the bonus looking? Thank you so much for those kind words. And as I already mentioned, he talked about the 6th and 7th of June. The Sanlam Gauge, along with the team from Sanlam, were there at the launch of the ESD Community of Practice. For those who don't know, it's essentially a private sector-led initiatives where corporates in South Africa are getting together, sharing ideas about how we can improve in the enterprise and supply development scores on the various kind of sector codes. As you will see later on in the presentation, it's one of the many elements that we haven't quite reached the levels that we all hope to. I also want to recognize the ICT Council. Mr. Tlaule is here, Andile, with his team. He's the chairman of the ICT Council, and he tells me that they also got over 20 interns that are logged online to watch this particular session. So thank you very much for the support of the ICT Council, and also quite engaged. Much appreciated, very important indeed. And I know there's many other charter councils that we're going to talk about. I'll keep telling you more of the people that are in the room. We are now going to take a short 15-minute break, just a comfort break. There are coffees at the same coffee station you'd have seen this morning. Some snacks will be brought into the room, and we will kick off exactly at 10:20, just to ensure we kick the program and keep it on time. So please enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. If you don't mind taking your seats so we can get going. Thanks, everyone. It was so nice. That 15-minute break was awesome. Welcome also to everybody that's coming from the online stream. Good to see so many familiar faces. I had a good chat with the president of the BMF, who's here. Dr. Vilagazi, you're welcome, ma'am. A brand new president, may I add. I'm sure they will have some input to make on management control later on the panel. I also bumped into the CEO of BUSA, Mr. Comrade Kgosana. That's what I call him. He says comrade back every time. We are not card-carrying members, though, but he is my comrade. And just like, just meeting so many other people, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You're most welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I've received an official complaint twice. And the complaint was, at what point will we see a woman on stage? Because it was me, it was the chairman, it was the editor, it was Memani, all these men. Trust me, that was the first stuff. The male contingent is going to be less seen from here on out. Because now we're at a point where we need to unpack the findings of the 2023 Sanlam Transformation Gauge. And we have a partnership. Obviously, Intellidex are the independent researchers. You got to keep the research independent. And they are very good at research, so they do all the research. But a really critical cog in our team is the team from Empowerdex. Because, data alone is just data. The interpretation of the data needs experts. And broad-based Black economic empowerment is an expert field. And we're quite fortunate that from day one, this wonderful lady has been a part of our team and has led a lot of the analysis and the interpretation of the data. She's been able to pick up where we've mixed certain data points that have come out in a certain way. Even this year, she picked up some things that we can improve on next year. So ladies and gentlemen, to give us a detailed insight into the findings that are coming out of the current year's research, which is the moment we've all been waiting for. Of course, one of the roses amongst the many thorns. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Ms. Lerato Ratsoma.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lerato Ratsoma. I'm from Empowerdex, and I have been working with the Intellidex team to look at what is happening with the Sanlam Gauge 2023. So this is our third year of running these particular stats, and we are hoping that you will find this particular session quite useful. I'll be going through the methodology that we used in the Sanlam Gauge, Sanlam Transformation Gauge 2023, and also going into some of the details in the individual elements as well as the different sectors that we will be looking at. So just give me 1 second. Great. So I think Andile at the beginning did mention that there has been quite an improvement in the number of scorecards that we have assessed. This year we looked at 14,000 scorecards as opposed to last year's 10,000. And I think the first year, our inaugural year, we were looking at around 3,000 scorecards. And what we have done with those scorecards is to separate them into those that are under the DTI scorecard, as well as the different sector codes, going up to agri all the way down to tourism. There's only one sector code that we didn't include, only because the numbers that we were getting from the sector were very low and did not necessarily give a good indicator of the sector, which would have been the defense scorecards. So what we have done then is to look at all of the scorecards, separate them according to the 5 main elements of BEE, which is your equity ownership, management control, skills development, enterprise and supplier development, as well as socioeconomic development. Some of the sector codes obviously would have additional elements that they would be assessed against. Those we did not take into account because what we're trying to do is to look at like versus like. So therefore, when we're looking at SED, we're just looking at SED and trying not to include local economic development and all those other elements. And so what we did then was also, another point would be that the initiatives, there's quite a lot of companies that are doing the YES initiative, the Youth Employment Service Initiative. So those particular companies would have a higher BEE level recognition. So say they were level 3, there would be a level 2. So that would not have been taken into account in this particular assessment because we're only looking at the scores that were gained and comparing those over time. So that is what we're seeing here with our 14,500 scorecards, and we looked at the averages in terms of the points gained from all of those, and looked at the averages for all of the elements for all of those. You will note that the majority of our scorecards were from the DTI scorecard, the generics as we call them, with the rest of the elements coming from the different sector codes, which means that there will still be quite a heavy weighting in terms of the scoring from the DTI scorecards. Now, this is then how the different sectors are looking on aggregate. With all of them, we can start firstly right at the bottom because that's where the majority of our numbers come from. You will be able to see that over time there has been some improvements at the bottom generics in terms of the scoring, even though it is still within the level 4 rating. Which is very encouraging because generally with the generics, there hasn't been much of a movement in the previous year, but we are happy to see that there has been a slight improvement, still not enough to kick them above one level, but still sufficient. Then we're looking at the rest of the other elements that we will go, or the other sectors that we'll go into in more detail later on. But what we can see is that there's generally slight improvements in most of them. There's only a few that dropped a little bit, but we are encouraged that on average we're seeing level 4s, level 3s, and a couple of level 2s as well. Now, one of the main things that you must always remember when we're looking at this is that we're also considering how each and every single sector is being measured. So for example, all of them would have been allocated into level recognitions status based on the DTI scorecard, and where the recognition levels are completely not aligned to the DTI not website, but scorecards, we will then do an adjustment similar to how FSC does their adjustments for the different subsectors so that we can have like for like, which is exactly what we have done with ICT as well, where we did a small adjustment so that it is comparable to the rest of the elements. Okay. So overall, when it comes to, sorry, I'm looking at two different screens here. When it comes to South Africa Inc., overall we have improved. The total scores for all companies was 90.3, if I'm not mistaken, which is just above the level 3 threshold. So we just made it above. Whether we'll be able to maintain or drop back next year, something that we'll be looking into. But based on the stats that I'm going to go through, I have a feeling that we're likely to be able to maintain, if not improve on these. So overall, all the companies that we looked at, we saw that there was a slight increase in black ownership from 75% to 81%. So let me just explain that. The target here is the weighting points that are available for companies within that particular element. So for example, majority of them will have 25 points that they're aiming towards under black ownership. And we are saying, how far are we from reaching 25 points? On average, the target for ownership is 25%, with some like ICT going up to 30, and as well as tourism going up, as well as construction. But on average, it is 25% that we're looking at. So when I say we're at 81, we're at 81% of reaching our total target. So it's not that we are 81% transformed, just 81% to reaching that particular target. Okay. Then when we go into management and control, which is on average out of 19, we can see that there was a significant improvement in the previous year. This is something that we were not expecting based on the previous years and how employment equity has been looking. I mean, if you look at 21, we're sitting at 58%, 56%, and then 69%. So we're very encouraged about that because this has been one of the big topics that we have covered in previous years, why it is so sticky for employment equity to improve, why it is that it doesn't always seem to be linked to the skills development outcomes. And one of the things that was quite interesting, which I'm sure Andile will be chatting about later on, is whether the changes or the amendments in the employment equity legislations will actually help us to move employment equity and management and control even further. So this is how we're looking this year in 2023 at 69% of the target. Then we go into skills development. Skills development has been around 75% on average all along, and we saw a particular improvement to 85% this year. Now, one of the things that I wanted to just point out from a methodology point of view, when we are releasing the Sanlam Gauge 2023, it's based on certificates that were issued in 2022. And those certificates that were issued in 2022 are normally based on a financial year. That financial year is likely to have been 2021 and some coming into 2022. So these figures are for that particular period based on their current certificates. And what we're seeing here, I would say, is probably an effect of a post-COVID economic environment where we're seeing improvements and abilities for companies to start spending more on those initiatives that required more spending. So that is what we're seeing from the stats as we look into them. Then we go to enterprise and supplier development. We were fully expecting this to have improved significantly because we know that it is post-COVID, post-lockdown figures that we're looking at, but we're surprised that it is still below the previous high of 85%, we're sitting at 76% attainment. Now, just to remind you, enterprise development is made up of 3 sub-elements: procurement, which is heavily weighted towards procuring from Black-owned suppliers, and QSCs and EMEs. Then we also have enterprise development, about 1% of the net profit after tax that we are assessing, as well as supplier development. So out of the 42 or so points, 27 is from procurement, and the rest will be from supplier development and enterprise development. So unfortunately, because of the types of scorecards that we are assessing, the figure for enterprise development is a solid figure. It's not broken down into the sub-elements. It would be quite interesting to see the effect of procurement on the supplier enterprise development portion and be able to see how enterprise and supplier development individually fare versus procurement. But I can give you some indication based on the certificates that I have accessed through my years of experience in verification, in that majority of companies do generally get full points when it comes to enterprise development and supplier development, because it's quite easy to be able to find initiatives and donate to the initiatives, give loans, mentoring, and all of those good things. However, it's not always as easy to increase the number of Black-owned suppliers that are in the value chain. And with the 2019 amendments to the codes, we do know that that has made it a tad bit harder for companies, and that more effort needs to go into that. So that is possibly, in my opinion, the reason that it's still at 76% and hasn't quite reached 100%, mainly because of procurement. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done under enterprise and supplier development for us to be able to get to a place where, on average, 50% of all value chains and supply chains are from procuring from Black-owned suppliers. And then we've got socioeconomic development that is always above the targets, mainly because of the different weightings in the different industries, as well as some of the other types of companies that we assess, because part of this particular analysis includes some QSCs as well. Now, this is quite interesting for us to look at 2021 compared to 2023, and also taking into account that 2023 is 10 years since the codes were last gazetted or overhauled in a way. So they were released, I think, on the 11th of October in 2013, and now we're sitting at 2023, and it would be quite interesting to see from a DTIC and the B Commissioner's Office what are the major areas that we would need to fine-tune and tweak in order to get much mobilization in attainment of targets, and even assessing whether those targets are sufficient. Are they stretch targets, or are they too easy to attain? And are we going about the right ways in making sure that we have impact versus just the spending of the amounts in the different areas? So this is how we're looking. SA Inc., we can say there has been an improvement, but now we go into the details of it. Mr. Masilela mentioned the discussion around the difference between the listed versus unlisted entities, with the assumption that the listed have much bigger balance sheets and they're able to move more and do more when it comes to empowerment. However, what we have found, another point being that the listed companies generally have to submit their compliance reports to the B Commissioner as part of their listing requirements. So the assumption always has been that we assume they will be better, the shining light, the example to everyone else. And what we're seeing here, just looking through, is that the listed companies have actually underperformed the unlisted companies by a mile in some instances. One of the things that I noted was the black ownership portion, where the unlisted companies are sitting at 86%, whereas the listed are at around 76%. One of the reasons we could be seeing something like this is that there is now a trend with the listed companies to not do their BE transactions at the listed level, but at subsidiary level or operating level, which means that then the listed company sits with no sizable black ownership. So that could be one of the reasons that the black ownership is much higher for the unlisted entities. Then we look at management and control, still in the 50s. There isn't much of a difference. We look at skills development with the unlisted at 77, which tells us that, I mean, the assumption here is that with larger companies, you would have a whole department that will make sure that we have the proper skills, we have proper planning in terms of making sure that the right people get the right development so that they can influence our employment equity stats. So it was quite surprising to find that the listed entities are lower when it comes to such an important aspect. And then we go to enterprise and supply development, 89% for the unlisted versus 78%. And of course, socioeconomic development, everyone is always on par or exceeding their targets. So this is something that, for me, it would be interesting to drill down as to why there is such a difference between the listed versus the unlisted, considering the focus on the listed companies, and also considering that the men on the street, when they look at a listed company, they assume that they should be the most transformed of all of the companies, and they are the ones that get the spotlight. So it would be quite interesting to see what the reasons could be behind that and to hear any views around that. Okay. Now going into our actual sectors. We looked at the Agri-BEE. I think the Sector Council is here. And what we found is that we have a slight mixed bag with a lot of improvements from last year. So, for example, the ownership for Agri has increased from 68 to 75. However, it's still below the 2021 figures. We are seeing an improvement in management and control, which must be commended, and probably one of the reasons why the overall management and control has gone up. some improvements in skills development, and some improvements in enterprise and supply development. But as you can see, there is a big difference between the 2001 attainments versus the 2023 attainments. So 2001 probably has a lot of certificates pre-COVID, with the 2022 being right in the middle of the thick of things, and 71%, which is the 2023 amount, being post-COVID figures. And then, of course, socioeconomic development is quite surprising that they are below 100 in all of the years, but we can see that there was definitely a drop in the previous year for the SED portion of the Agri-BEE. So overall, level 3, there can be some improvements. There will be, well, I'm hoping there will be improvements as the economy improves and there's more availability of resources to be able to fund the different farming activities that fall under the Agri-BEE, so that we can get the highest scores possible. Now, when we look at Agri, listed versus unlisted, we have slightly different outcomes. We have the listed companies coming out much stronger in terms of black ownership, and we also have the listeds also coming out stronger under skills development at 70%. Sorry, I can't see my screen there that clearly. At 70% versus 68%. But what we can see is that management and control for unlisted is much better, with management and control for the listed actually going below the 50% mark, which is quite an area of concern that should be delved into further to figure out why it would be so low compared to everything else. And of course, we've got enterprise and supply development at 85%, and socioeconomic really at the bottom, with the listed companies sitting at 34% attainment, which is completely out of kilter with everyone else in the industry. So it will be interesting to find out from the Agri-BEE Sector Council what their thoughts are around that. And then we go into construction, where we can see that 2023 has been an improvement in quite a number of fronts, from ownership to management and control to skills development, as well as enterprise and supply development and SED. They are still slightly below, in some instances, the 2021 figures, which is our baseline year. And what we can see, though, is that there seems to be a move towards the right direction, especially when you consider the improvements in skills, the improvements in enterprise and supply developments, and also the humongous increases around management and control, which went up all the way from 67 to 84. Which is something that must definitely be commended for the construction sector, considering some of the things that are happening in the industry. But they were able to attain a level 2 level contribution status overall for all the entities that were in our sample this particular year. Now, this is another comparison, how we're looking from the listed versus unlisted companies. And here we see the listed construction companies actually pushing hard. Ownership is above the targets, 101% for the unlisted companies. Skills development also going into bonus points territories for skills development at 113. We've got 105 for enterprise and supply development, as well as socioeconomic development for the listed companies. So this is quite encouraging, but it's probably because of the competition in this particular industry that makes sure that all the entities are actually operating at the highest level possible, and possibly also because they are probably the operating entities that are listed, as opposed to lower down subsidiaries that are being assessed. So that is how they're looking. Listed companies averaging a level 1 and unlisted averaging a level 2. Financial services sector averaged a level 2 this year. As you will recall, financial services includes all the different sectors or subsectors within, from the banking to the asset managers to insurance and the likes. And what we have assessed is only those elements that are similar or common to all of them. So we can see that for them, there was a definite improvement in ownership, even further than what they achieved in 2001. Management control, no movement over the years. Skills development, I would still say no movement over the years, quite constant and consistent at 78%. There's been an improvement in enterprise and supplier development, which we are it is encouraging. However, remembering that this is just, it's based on their actual targets and does not necessarily mean that is the best that we can do, especially taking into account the types of needs that we have as from Black-owned entities that are looking for funding to be able to do more and to also influence other industries. So this is what the financial services sector looks like, improvements overall across the board. However, it is a concern that the management and control and skills has been quite stagnant over a number of years now. We're hoping that one day we'll see a spike somewhere, spike going up, not down, in any one of those numbers. Yeah. Now, looking at the difference between their listed and unlisted. Listed, average level 3, so lower, and the unlisted were at a level 2, much higher. So as you can see, listed companies do not behave the same in the different industries that we look at. In this case, Black ownership is at 89% compared to the others at 92%. We're looking at skills, still the same, slight improvement on the unlisted side on the skills part. Management and control, still the same for everyone. Enterprise and supplier development on par. And of course, SED being fine for everyone. So in this case, yeah, the listed companies would need to actually come to the party to show us that with all of the resources that are available to them compared to the smaller financial services companies, what else are they doing to reach those particular targets? And remembering that those 89 and 92 for Black ownership, it's kept at 25% Black ownership. Yeah. And we go to forestry, which is sitting at level 3. And as you can see, in some instances, or in majority of the instances, there has been good performance in this particular year. We've got 92 coming down all the way from 53 in the first year. 92% attainment of their targets, 54, which is midway for management and control. Then we've got skills development, which has gone up to 88, which is quite a significant improvement from last year, and something that definitely must be commended, and hopefully it can be maintained and improved upon. Enterprise development, great improvement from last year, which was 68%. We're now sitting at 90. Hopefully by the next year, they should be able to attain that 100% attainment. But one of the things that I just need to point out, my comment about the 50% target for, or on average, for procurement, it is applicable to the generic companies with the majority of the sector codes not yet aligned to the new principles that were released in 2019. We're still waiting for the different sector codes to submit their amendments so that we can see what they will look like with the higher targets, assuming that the sectors accept the higher targets for Black ownership under procurement. So that's something that we would be quite keen to assess and to find out exactly how far we are with the charters attain or amending their sector codes. Okay, so then we have ICT. which came in at a level 4 using their own level contribution status. We saw an increase in ownership. We saw an increase in management and control. At least in this case, there was a break from the average 54 that they were looking at. So there's still hope for financial services to come out of that little place that they seem to be stuck at. And then we are looking at 91% attainment for skills development, which is quite substantial for the industry, especially considering that there's a lot of attraction for the younger generation to get into ICT and actually make a difference in that industry. So 91% attainment is something that is quite high and commendable. Then we look at enterprise and supply development. It's gone up to 86% from 62%, meaning that there is hope in that particular industry that everything will be, or that there should be some improvements in the future. Now, socioeconomic development, they're sitting at 89% attainment. Please keeping in mind that their target or their weightings is 12 points as opposed to everyone who averages around 5 points. And so it seems it is slightly harder for the industry to reach 100% for SED, which I know is supposed to bridge the digital divide and focus on that particular industry. And this is something that we would be keen to look at to see what else can be done to at least reach the target for SED. So level 4 on average using their own recognition levels. And then when we look at the difference between the listed versus unlisted companies, we find that the listed are sitting at level 4 and unlisted at level 2. So the trend continues of the listed companies being slightly below the unlisted in this particular industry. We see about 87% attainment for the unlisted companies, which considering that a sizable chunk of the industry probably requires ICASA licenses and things like that that require them to reach certain percentages in ownership, the expectation would have been that majority of them would have been at least at 100% or the late 90s because of how important it is in their industry. But yeah, we're looking at 82 and 87 for the listed and the unlisted. Flat 59% for employment equity, a slight drop in skills development for the unlisted companies with better performance for the listed, and again flat when it comes to enterprise and development. There isn't much of a difference when it comes to that. And then we've got the socioeconomic development with the unlisted actually doing slightly better than the listed companies when it comes to that. Integrated transport. So this one is our interesting baby every year, mainly because it is not really aligned with the rest of the codes. It's still based on the old 2007 scorecards where we have 7 elements, whereas now we're on average assessing 5 elements. So we do know that there is light at the end of this particular tunnel because the new sector council has been announced, and there's plans to upgrade the particular scorecards, and I think there's a whole article around that in the Sanlam Gauge report that you can go through. But being as it is, we still would include them in the analysis because they are a very important part of the economy, the integrated transport industry. So from a black ownership point of view, unfortunately, we saw a significant drop to 61% from last year's 90%. And then at the same time, we saw an increase in management and control from 55 to 66%, which should be quite interesting to assess what the reasons would be for such an increase in management and control at the same time as a drop in black ownership. We look at skills development sitting at 80%, which is a big improvement, but remembering that their target for skills development is around 3% of leviable payroll, whereas everyone else is on average 6% of leviable payroll. So at half the target, they're sitting at 80%. So if we were to use the same information and put it into the generic codes, the chances are it will be way less. Hopefully it will reach at least 50% of that target. Then when it comes to ESD, here we have combined enterprise development and procurement. Then the actual code process will take after consultations and submissions and the first gazetting for public comment and then the final gazetting. So we're expecting that, I don't think it will be feasible for them to be implemented this year in 2023, so perhaps in 2024, which means that the effect of any changes are likely to come through possibly in 2025. So yeah, we'll still be looking at the same types of scorecards even next year, unless something very different happens and they shoot the lights out in terms of attaining the milestones and making sure that everything gets gazetted as soon as possible. Then we've got the marketing and advertising and communications, and they're sitting at a level 4. However, we can have a look at this and see that there's been improvements under black ownership. There's been slight improvements under management and control. There's been improvements under skills development and enterprise and supplier development. It's just that in most cases, they have not reached the 2021 levels, which is the baseline. So we're hoping that after this dip, there will be an upward trajectory. There's already indications that it should be even better next year based on what has been happening in the sector and the engagements that the sector council has been having. So we look forward to seeing if next year produces even better results than this year. But it is very encouraging levels that we're looking at for the MAC charter, the marketing, advertising, and communications at level 4. Then we've got property, which is sitting at level 4. So I think it's one of the few that we saw drops in ownership and management and control, as opposed to being able to maintain or improve on those. And then we have skills development, which is round about the 2021, and enterprise development still below the 2021, but slight improvement on that. We are looking, we do know that the property industries has been under a lot of pressure with people not wanting to work at their offices and making it difficult to attain internal targets, especially for the listed property entities. And so it would be quite interesting then to see whether there is a big difference in those types of entities. What we're seeing is that our listed entities are sitting at an average of a level 6 versus the unlisted at a level 4. So yeah, it is an industry that probably is still reeling from the after effects of the downsizing of a lot of companies, of instability in their particular industry. And obviously with the rates going up, it does not necessarily help their tenants to be able to maintain their occupancy rates and things like that. But we're seeing that on the unlisted side, at least there are some improvements, sitting at 64% for black ownership, sitting at 30% for management and control, 80% for skills development, and a slight drop in enterprise development at 93%. And of course, socioeconomic development is much higher for the unlisted companies versus the listed companies. So this is an industry that definitely we would need to perhaps get into a tad bit more in detail to determine what the barriers are, especially if you look at management and control, to getting it to a level that is that shows that there is progress, that shows that there are things that are happening within the industry. Then we've got tourism, which is sitting at an average of a level 4. Tourism, there seems to be improvements from last year, but still not reaching some of the targets from 2001. But on average, we're seeing that there seems to be a trajectory in the right direction, improvements in management and control, ownership, skills development, as well as enterprise and supply development. So here, what we are hoping for is just the consistency in the improvements and ensuring that they actually reach at least 80% of all of the targets. I think they are also the ones with a slightly higher black ownership target, like ICT, which is much higher than the current 25 that most of the other industries are sitting at. And then when we look at their listed, they're on par, on average, up and down, with the listed also at level 4 and the unlisted at level 4. So I think for me, it's okay because majority of the tourism companies, especially the listed companies, seem to have come out of the slump that we saw in the middle of lockdown when there was zero occupancy at some points. And to see them being able to maintain, especially the skills development amounts as well as enterprise and supply development amounts is something that must be commended, that they were able to improve on those despite the market conditions. And so we're expecting that next year, the unlisted and the listed will continue to improve when it comes to this particular industry. Then we look at generics. Average is level 4. Unfortunately, just did not make it to the 90 point with a mixed bag when you look at it, sitting at 82% for ownership, 87% for skills, 71% for management and control, and 74%, which is a drop from last year for enterprise and supply development. One of the major improvements for the generic is that 71% for employment equity, which is something that is quite interesting because it pushed up the average for everyone else. And it would be interesting to see if this can be maintained. Hopefully it was not a fluke, that the generic entities would be able to maintain that particular type of scoring for management and control. Now, for the listed generic companies, what we are seeing is that we've got level 5 for, wait, sorry, I keep forgetting that I'm using two different things. So we're looking at level 4 for the unlisted and level 5 for the listed companies. So they're actually doing worse for the listed companies versus the unlisted companies, which is a theme that we have been seeing in the other sector codes and something that we should investigate further, especially considering or taking into account that at least those types of entities, the B Commissioner's Office would have the details of their scorecards to see what the problem is that they are not at least meeting their unlisted counterparts in terms of attainment. Now, generic, we had about 9,000 scorecards that we went through. And so within that 9,000, we then decided to dig deeper into a couple of subsectors that are quite important to the economy, with mining being one of them, because their mining rights are dependent on their black percentages, but that is calculated different to how we calculate it from the BE point of view. But be that as it may, we can see that the 2023 figures for ownership are sitting at 79% attainment versus last year's 100. And everything else seems to be on par for management and skills and slightly lower for enterprise and supply development, as well as socioeconomic development. Yeah, so that is mining, which we were hoping that it will at least maintain the level 4 from last year. Manufacturing, which covers quite a number of sub-industries within it, was able to maintain a level 4 across all of the companies within manufacturing. They increased in terms of black ownership quite significantly from 70 to 88%. Management and control was level, skills development, slight drop, enterprise and supply development, slight improvement, but nothing major that we can write about. With socioeconomic development also slightly dropping from the 100% mark. Then the one that we always have a look at is the wholesale and retail, mainly because it contains quite a number of large entities that are not necessarily subject to any sector code and therefore are working off the generic score. We see an improvement in black ownership, which is great. Management and control is quite level, which is surprising because considering the numbers of people that are employed in the industry, you would have expected it to be a whole lot higher. There isn't much of an improvement when we look at skills and enterprise and supplier development, and there's a slight underperformance when it comes to socio-economic development. So our retailers are sitting at level 4, retailers and wholesalers, and they are the ones, the major subsectors that we look at under the generic scorecard. So in terms of the Sanlam gauge, that is the very long and the short of it. If you want more details, it's definitely in the book. And one of the things that we can then look at is to say that as a whole, there has been improvements. The improvements are slight. The most notable one would have been under management and control. And the ESD under generic definitely dropped everyone else across the board. And the question is, now that we've gone through this whole process and we can see how we're looking on an overall basis, are we going in the right direction? Do we still need to tweak? How clean is the water that our baby is bathing in, that we keep referring to? And what can be done to improve so that next year when we look at this, we get excited about the improvements and we get excited about things that are going to change things and move things and absolutely take us to a direction that makes more sense for us. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lerato. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a rare opportunity to pick Lerato's brain. I've been working with her, of course, for the past 3 years, and trust me, there's a lot in that brain. I know that there are a lot of stakeholders here. During the break, Lerato, I was getting pulled side to side. At least we are level this year. At least we are level that. So I invite you to please ask all of the questions. There are already questions that we've received in the live stream. I've prepared some already for you. But I think we should start with integrated transport.
Okay.
And I wanted to, I know that we invited the department. I want to make sure, is there anybody from the Department of Transport in the room? Because I do think that update on their sector code is quite important because it throws it off, isn't it? Because we're not quite comparing apples with apples there.
No, completely. And I think it is a frustration for the companies within that particular sector because they are almost looking at 2 scorecards at the same time, not knowing when they will be required to switch, especially because they were told that when the new sector code comes through, there will be no transition. So it is also making it difficult for the small companies that operate in that industry because they cannot use the BEE affidavits that all the other SMMEs are using. They have to go through a process as per their sector code. So yeah, the sooner all of that is fixed and aligned, the better for everyone.
Okay, great. And on that note, let's just make sure we all understand what's happening with mining, because we see that you kind of pull it out of generic. Most people understand that the mining sector has got its own BEE charter. We know there was a whole debate between the DMRE and the Minerals Council. What is the status of the mining sector insofar as BEE and sector codes is concerned?
So the mining sector, for procurement purposes, will always use the generic scorecard. They don't have a sector code that is aligned to the BEE Act and the BEE Codes of Good Practice as it stands. They're still submitting their own social and labor plans, which has slightly different definitions and requirements and leeways here and there that are not there in the BEE scorecard. So that is what they're doing right now. We do know that there is more focus from the mining industry on ensuring that their social and labor plans are perfect when submitted to their line ministry, because that's where the mining rights are dependent on. And when it comes to B procurement, that we haven't seen as much of a focus on that, but the fact that they're at a level 4 means that they're doing something and maintaining, just not possibly concentrating too much on that for now.
A consistent complaint that comes from the sector councils is how hard they find it for companies in their sector to submit scorecards so that they can fulfill their responsibility, in fact, of issuing a report on the status of transformation in their own sectors. I know for a fact the Agri-BEE sector council keeps referencing this. In our research, we have 177 companies that reported in accordance to the Agri-BEE sector code. You speak to the Department of Land Reform, who are the custodians of the sector council, and they're saying we are struggling to get just a handful of them to report. Why is it so hard for the sector councils to fulfill their responsibility of being able to issue out reports?
Okay, the good thing is that quite a few sector councils this year have sent through communication via the South African National Accreditation Service to request the rating agencies to supply those certificates directly to the sector councils, as opposed to the sector councils waiting for the companies to submit. So we should be able to see an improvement in their own data collection, possibly after at least 12 months of collecting such certificates. And I think one of the major issues was how the formats, how do we submit, in which formats, which sizes, and things like that, especially because all the different sector codes are now starting to ask for the same type of information, plus the submissions to the B Commissioner. So the information is there. It's all around us. I mean, for the Sanlam Gauge, we used 3 service providers or sources of data to get to our 14,000 entities that were assessed. So we do know that they do exist, but in the type of detail that the sector councils require and the B Commissioner requires, I think that getting it directly from the rating agencies is likely to lead to an improvement over time.
I think that will indeed. Now, last question from me. If you look at kind of the overall story, you talked about a slight improvement, especially year on year. It seems to me that, is there transformation happening? I think the answer is yes, there is, but clearly at a very slow pace. Outside of socioeconomic development, none of the sectors have achieved any of their targets, and most of them have had it for many years, some of them more than a decade, any of their other targets. Do you think, how long do you think it'll take for any of those other 4 elements to reach 100%? And in fact, which one do you think will be the first?
Oh my gosh. So it's very difficult to say because we're looking at these entities based on the current targets, and those current targets are not even the absolute highest that we can aspire to.
Exactly. Like ownership is only 25%.
Yes. So it is very difficult to say when are we going to reach 50% black ownership. I know that enterprise development is trying very hard, procurement is trying very hard, and my feeling is that if we can fix that part, we're likely to see an improvement, because then the minute you have majority of our supply chain sitting at 50%, including the retailers who struggle with that, we are likely to then see a critical mass of black-owned businesses who can then grow. But for as long as we're not reaching those procurement targets, our enterprise and supply development is for getting the highest points possible without looking at, is it actually creating black new entities or not, then we're not likely to reach any meaningful milestones.
Before I go to the room, let me quickly pick some points that came from the live stream. There's a whole conversation in the live stream, by the way, about, maybe let's call it the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room was the survey from the rating agencies when asked, do they think there is resistance? So Sean started by saying, I hope the percentage decrease in reaching full points is addressed in the reports. When one adds the reasoning into why full points is not scored, that relates to the defiance to increase participation in BEE. Zimisela then says, what actions are taken against the resistance of corporate South Africa in transformation? And then Mdu says, which is why I'd like your comment, he says very little. That is what's holding South Africa back until the government implements serious financial punitive measures to hit them in the pocket. The status quo will remain. Do you think it is time for fines?
So BEE is a BEE is a we'll call it a voluntary process, right? Because companies opt into it, mainly because of what their clients require of them. So procurement has been a driver for BEE for the longest time. Government procurement being one of the biggest ones. Considering how much government procures, you would expect that if they were going to insist on BEE, proper BEE, then we should be a whole lot further than we are at the moment.
Okay.
So companies need to worry about maintaining their cost structures, their margins and all of those things, which we understand, but there needs to be something to push it from being a compliance issue to being something that we want to do because we understand the benefits to us as a business. And this should be seen throughout the whole industry because it is very cynical if we're only looking at it in terms of, will it attain me that particular contract? If I don't get it, then I don't care. That's what we need to get over.
Right.
When it comes to fines and things like that, I'll leave it to the departments.
I like how you choose
all of those,
yeah.
and the unions to discuss all of that.
All right, guys, another round of applause for Lerato.
Thank you.
Please put on some lights for me in the room, just for me to see the hands. I'm going to take 3 questions and 2 rounds of 3 questions. So please keep them short and succinct. We do have time issues. I see the chairman of the ICT Charter Council there. Maybe he's not happy with these numbers.
Is it on? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mtumo. I think I'm not going to talk about our sector, and first, congratulations in terms of the numbers. But I think I'm stuck to what the non-executive chairman, Mr. Elias Masilela, introduced in this room today for me. Since I've been in this ecosystem years ago, more than 20 years ago, I think the concept of an economic model that has dependables and independables. And I'm sure he asked us to write, so I did some writing. And I wanted to ask Lerato, because what he actually said, we need to pick up in his theory, is that the economic inclusivity which we want to achieve can only happen when 3 things happen at the same time, which is equal access, equal opportunity, and all those happening at the same time. I've left one, participation.
Yep.
And I think maybe from me for today, maybe we need to start there. And we are going to go do a homework in the council and say, all the stakeholders here, what is it that we can do together, just that one, and see if we can test the concept of economic inclusivity based on his model. And then maybe next year we can come back and see if we have succeeded. So in the report, maybe pick up those that we, all of us here, can coordinate under those 3 independent variables. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andile. There was another hand there. Yes. I'm looking for a lady. There's a lady right in front of me. I'm very reminded of gender parity. The president of the BMF was pulling my ear. Yes, ma'am, please.
It's still morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Khosi from the Forest Sector Charter Council. Thank you, Sanlam. Thank you for the report. You know, when we see such a report, especially for the forest sector, we get excited. Because one thing that is very key to us is that the numbers must not differ. Because the moment the numbers differ, we are sending 2 different messages to the market. But my question is, I hear, Lerato, you said in the first, the report is based on the number of companies or the reports that you had from each companies. But I didn't see a comparison of the numbers of forestry JSE listed companies. And we do have them. I'm not sure whether is it because you had few of those that were forestry listed companies, or it's because you didn't get them. And I want to put my hand next time that we are there to assist in
Lovely.
case you need such information.
Lovely stuff.
And my last point is that I think we are using the wrong terminology for BE. BE is not voluntary, it's mandatory, it has an act. That is the language we should start using. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Kosi. And there's a gentleman right in front of me here. Yes, sir.
It's still the morning. Good morning, all.
It is indeed the morning, sir.
I'm Marime Mukwena from the Department of Agriculture. Land
Welcome,
Development
Doc.
And Rural Development.
We're glad you are here in person this year.
Yeah, no, this year. I'm not sick this year. Remember last year we had this flu.
Yeah.
I'm actually with the Agri-BBEE Charter Council, which we are hosting. My first question is to find out more from the agriculture side. The companies that you have analyzed.
Yes.
In terms of categories, we want to find out whether do we have primary agriculture there.
Right.
Because that is the most difficult subsector that we are having a challenge with. Because transformation can happen at the other levels of storage, whatever, along the value chain. But the most difficult part is at the primary.
Right.
That's where the real transformation is required.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. And then, again, in terms of your analysis, in future, I think we'll appreciate if you could analyze the detailed scorecard so that we see those youths, we see those women who have been empowered. How many are they? And all that. Because the way it is now is just at the, at the element level. It doesn't give us the transformation, because that's what they tell us when we go around. They say, don't come here and tell us about the levels. We don't know anything about these levels. Remember, we are dealing with a society here who don't understand these levels, what they mean. But I think if we can add that analysis on the detailed scorecard,
yeah,
that will help us a lot.
Thank you, sir.
My last question is on the issue of, in terms of Section 13G of the Act, all the organs of state are now, it's mandatory that they must report to the B Commission, submit their form, they call it Form B-BBEE1. So I think the analysis, we must also analyze the government departments.
Analyze the
doing
government
our part as government. Because if the government is not doing well in transformation, how do we expect the industry to transform? But currently we don't know. But let's add the government departments there as well in the analysis. I don't know how we are going to do it, but we are all, I think, in terms of that Section 13G, we are all have to have our own BE certificate as government departments.
All right.
Like enough in agriculture, we do have our BE certificate, but it doesn't look good. But we do have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mkwena. Oh, it's nice to have Dr. Mkwena here in the audience asking the questions this time, not providing answers. BE Commissioner, I can't let you off the hook. At some point, I'm going to send the microphone to you just for you to reflect on the conversation so far.
Yeah.
But you want to hit off the questions. Maybe you're going to start with anyone that you wish, actually.
Okay. I think to the Agri-BE questions, the problem with the analysis is that we're using certificates, and certificates have limited information on them. So, for example, in later years, we should be able to also comment on the designated groups. That is now a requirement in the certificates. But apart from that, without getting the full scorecard, it is much more difficult to go into the detail. So we're limited by what's on the face of.
What if the certificate was changed to provide some detail?
It can be, which is why there was an amendment, I think, in 21, where we had to provide the designated groups. It can be amended. It's just a matter of a gazette or two to get that thing done. Right. But currently, the full scorecard is not mandatory for it to be sent out, because the idea was that this certificate was used for procurement purposes, and all you needed was a level and nothing else.
Got you.
That's why.
Got you.
And I think around the property sector.
Forestry.
Or forestry, yes.
No listings. She'll give you listings.
Yeah, I think on our data set, we had too little to form an opinion about. So we're more than happy to interact and see what do you have so that we can show you what we do have. And one other comment on agri. The main limitation about a study such as ours is that we are able to access certificates that are available. If people have not, or companies have not been rated, therefore they are likely to be non-compliant, and we will not know about them, and we will not be able to compare them against the ones that are rated. So that's always something that we need to take into account. And then in terms of inclusivity, there's a number of elements within the scorecard that seeks to have inclusive or diversified, whether it's employment or value chains and things like that. However, it is, there are other people there who some would call gatekeepers, who make it more difficult for that inclusivity to happen. So the question is, how do we break up those walls, those doors in all of the other areas to try and get as many people in as possible? Because we do know they exist. They have, from employment equity point of view, they have the right skills, the experience here and there through the YES program and things like that, but they difficulty to get inside. Same with procurement and enterprise development. So these are the things that we need to grapple with. How do we break it down so that more people can come inside, so that we can see a movement and shift in terms of perceptions about inclusivity and transformation, and also seeing it on the ground.
Dr. Mokwena's comment about government departments and their scorecards.
Yes, so in the previous years, we had a section on state-owned entities, but it was limited to only the state-owned entities and not departments. So for as long as their certificates are out there, we will find them and report on them, and hopefully they'll be able to compare themselves against other departments, because he is right, the few that I have seen are not great in terms of their outcomes compared to the SOEs. SOEs have been doing this for longer, the likes of ESCOM and all of those guys. They've been doing this for much longer, so they have processes, but government departments and those types, we are finding that it is difficult.
It's an interesting challenge, though, for the team to look at the potential of finding. The good thing with government departments is that there's a finite number, right?
Yeah.
So you know exactly how many they are, you know who they are, you know where they are. So we can always, I think that's a very interesting one. All right, I'm going to take one last round. I'm squeezing here. I'm going to get into trouble. There's a lady right in front of me here, if you don't mind, ma'am. Is that music for me? I know. Like they're doing the Oscars when you must shut up.
I'll be quick. Morning, everyone. So I'm sitting here and I'm so annoyed. I think the reason why I'm so annoyed is because I don't understand, after so many decades of the B-BBEE Act being implemented and approved, that we're still sitting in rooms like this having these sort of conversations. So if you look at organizations within South Africa, it has been proven that we are very resilient and agile. We've gone through the 4th Industrial Revolution, the 3rd Industrial Revolution. We've gone through COVID. I mean, there was a time where we had to rapidly take millions of people to work from home. How is it that we're still having these conversations from a transformation perspective and still not being where we need to be? Because it cannot be a thing of not being able to change, a thing of not being able to adapt. It certainly has to be a thing of will within these organizations. And where is this whole thing stopping? I think we should sort of have those conversations, because it's not our inability to embrace change. It's not our inability to adapt. It's our inability to be able to do this, because it actually is the right and just thing to do. So I think I just wanted to leave us with...
Sorry, your name, ma'am?
You're speaking to Vera.
Vera, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for capturing what is absolutely my frustration too. And I'll be very interested in how the panel responds to that. I'll take my lady here in front and the hand at the back that's waving and about to punch me all the way from the back. Let's try and be brief, guys, because there's some time.
Sorry, I'm going to be very brief. Look around this room. Who's sitting to hear about transformation? Look around this room. The people who need to be transforming this sector are not here. So let's look around this room. That's why transformation won't go anywhere, because look who's sitting in this room.
Thank you. Thank you. Good point. Where are they? At the back.
It's Hilda Mtimunyo from South African National Park, one of the state-owned agencies. My question, Lerato, is that we've got 3 subsidiaries of 4. It's tourism. We are a conservation agency. So we've got tourism, we've got forestry, we've got marine, which is more your water related in our coastal areas. So I want to find out which scorecard are we using. Presently, we're using the one for tourism.
Okay.
I think our reporting, because now we are not meeting any level. We downgraded. I think it's the way we capture the information from these different subsidiaries.
Interesting.
So I've got forestry here. Do I go to them to abide by the sector here? So I would like to be advised on that one so that I can improve my BE level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilda. You got that? Maybe start with the sandbox one and maybe reflect on the comments made by the ladies.
Can I answer hers because it's the easier one? So with all of the sector codes, the directive is that wherever more than 50% of your income comes from, that is the sector that you'll be rated against. So that is the rule that is currently being applied, and all the rating agencies would apply that. However, it's also possible to go and assess your different subsidiaries separately according to their specific sector codes, because otherwise you may find yourselves in situations where you do not necessarily capture, or you're looking for targets where you will never be able to abide. So the different ones, the tourism division gets done on tourism, others on generic, and others on, whatever is applicable. Then the other question was around?
I think it's just a reflection.
Oh, reflection, yes.
We find ourselves here.
Yeah. So it is a difficult one. We always require, from what I've noted with companies, if it doesn't affect your bottom line, then you don't have a very good reason to do anything about it. So whether it is access to market, access to clients, access to anything, to liquor licenses, since we're talking about liquor just now, or any other government licenses, if it doesn't affect any of that, if it is not a license to trade in South Africa, then we will be chatting again in 5 years' time.
That's very interesting, because I saw an article not so long ago about, I think it was the minister that's responsible for water. I think she was considering issuing the water utility licenses on the basis of BEE. And there was a big response from the market about how inappropriate that is. But I guess it's a sign of the times.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Lerato. Thank you, Lerato. Thank you so much for your time. Right. I think that the tone of the room is perfect for the next item on our agenda. Because the next item of our agenda is our panel. And the panel will be moderated by Khumalo Mfupi. You know her very well, award-winning journalist who is running Kaya Biz, currently on Kaya 95.9. And she has a robust panel to discuss some of the issues that have come up in this conversation, including the fact that we find ourselves here, and the fact that maybe many people that are, in fact, not even maybe, definitely many people that are in the decision-making seats on how to accelerate transformation are not necessarily engaged, if you had to just read the profile of the room. So without any further ado, Khumalo Mfupi, I hand over to you.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We sound grumpy. Is it because we're in the ICT sector? Is it because we're in property? Or is it because we're facing the reality that we have a lot of work ahead of us, right? So I'll greet you all again because the energy that was shared earlier by some of the ladies who literally removed the veneer of being politically correct is what we're looking for when we engage in this next conversation. So a very good morning to each and every one of you, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic. That is the energy that we're going to maintain throughout the rest of this conversation. I must say, reading through the report last night and, of course, listening through the results that Lerato has so eloquently gone through, many of us do sit uncomfortably in our seats. And as correctly stated, we do need to be honest about what the practicalities are on the ground when it comes to the lived experience of B-BBEE policies and how are they relating to the scorecard. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll have the opportunity to speak to different industry leaders who will join me on stage in just a moment. And many of them will talk through the themes of socio-economic development, how we also ensure that ownership can change effectively, what we're seeing in terms of ESD and changes that need to be implemented there, and of course, making sure that ownership and management control is also a priority. So I have encouraged many of our panelists to be very honest, to be robust, as Andile has mentioned, and most importantly, perhaps this is the time where we're going to take the baby out of the bath water, lay him or her on the bed, and reassess the quality of this water that we've been referencing throughout the course of this morning. So as they come up here on stage, I would like you to encourage them with your round of applause for them to be honest, to be open, to be truthful, and most importantly, to also assist us in seeking solutions that we aim to drive by the end of today. On that note, allow me to warmly welcome our fellow panelists who are joining me on stage this morning. They will make their way up onto the stage and have a seat towards my left-hand side to participate in the panel discussion. Tabia Kabinde, Chairperson for the Commission of Employment Equity, followed by Lita Guta, who's Co-Chairperson for Enterprise and Supply Development Community of Practice, Mamkeli Jim, Leverage Finance Transactor at RMB, Nozizwe Vundla, Head of the Sanlam Foundation, and Disa Mbande, who joins us as the Acting CEO of Mersita. Please warmly welcome them up to the front of the stage. Oh, my apologies if you can switch over just one. Yes, ma'am. Apologies. Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you again to you as audience members for that introduction. This is where we're going to toss the script and be very, very honest and brutal about the lived experience that many of you do have here in the room. And I do think that it is quite critical that, as has been reflected by the results and the opening statement of the Sanlam Gauge for 2023, that we do need to take an honest reflection of what the verification agencies had to respond to. The outcomes of the report, and of course the fact that is there a level of resistance to compliance when it comes to BE codes, coupled with a lack of skills. Both have been acknowledged, but the resistance is what clearly has been evidenced as a major challenge, not only here in this room, but also in the report. So I'm going to do a quick fire, review of some of your thoughts for many of you who have joined us on the panel. And Tabia, I think it's only fair that I do start with you. You have been very robust in sharing your frustrations that the Employment Equity Act has not been fully implemented, not met its targets, and much of those outcomes are very similar to what we see here in this year's Sanlam Gauge. Share your overviews and your frustrations, really, about how we need to ensure that transformation can take place.
Well, I guess one of the biggest issues that we have to discuss is how transformation legislation is not aligned and how we need to align it in order to put our energies in the same direction. That's the first thing. But being someone who obviously, in terms of employment equity, would be quite closely focused on management control, for me, the report was quite telling in saying that one of the key reasons why there's no transformation is the issue of racism. And for me, we cannot not talk about that openly and have an honest discussion about where we are. I was listening on the radio about the fact that it's President Mandela's birthday today, yes, and the Rainbow Nation that we had all hoped for, and how we glossed over everything without having rigorous debates about what needs to happen in the country and to confront the realities that we had at coalface. So I think this is symptomatic of the fact that we got so excited about the Rainbow Nation and never really confronted our realities and what needed to be changed up here in order for us to see the transformation that we need to have.
I want to stay with you for a second and ask you, when you sit opposite perhaps your white male counterparts and colleagues, what kind of conversations are you having with them to ensure that they are aligned in terms of mindset to overcome racism and prioritize transformation?
It depends who I'm talking to.
Oh.
White male, yes. But it depends on the level of depth we can have a discussion on. If it's people that we can have an honest discussion with, they'll talk to me about their fears, which are real.
What are their fears?
The fear that my future and the future of my children is not secured. I don't think I have a future in this country. I'm afraid of bringing you in. I don't even know you. And you saying you want to run my company, you want to come to top management. Do you know how hard we've worked for this as a family? Those are real. And I think we're not having that level of debate. And I, on the other side, saying, well, do you know where I come from? Do you know I'm first generation urban? You know, I am born by people from rural areas. And that comes with a whole lot of disadvantage and having to catch up to where you are. So that kind and that level of depth in discussion, in conversation, courageous conversations, we're not having, and looking straight at each other in the eye and saying, what is our reality? What are we going to do about it?
Yep. I see a few of your colleagues nodding their head, but Nosizo, I'll come to you. And Lita, happy for you to jump in on this one. I know you're itching for it.
Yeah.
You've had the opportunity, Nosizo, to work within a variety of sectors, government, private sector, entrepreneurship, and now with the Sanlam Foundation. And you've had the opportunity to understand how various stakeholders are accepting and are open to this depth of conversation to say, okay, all things aside, let's address our fears and our concerns and make sure that there is a level of alignment. What have you seen in your experience as you've journeyed through prioritizing transformation in the various spaces you've worked in?
I think that it does vary from sector to sector and from whether you're in private or in government. But I think that what I think we are slowly, and I'm hoping, I'm getting a sense of, Kukuletu, is that there's a sense that things are actually quite, we're on a bit of a precipice at the moment. When you think of like our reality, I think sometimes we forget that we're the most unequal society on earth in terms of wealth and income inequality. And I think that, only when we sit in that and we sit in those discomforts, do we then start thinking, actually, what do we do to get into the other side? And I think that I'm discerning there is a sense that there's been movements, for example, at BUSA level, I believe, in terms of leadership of businesses to see collaboratively what it is that they can do. And I'm hoping that that's going to come into something really, really tangible in terms of, because I think that the level of collaboration really needs to increase, and we need to up the game in order to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in. So I'm hoping that what I'm discerning is real. I'm hoping that we're going to see action taken in that regard. But yeah, I think there is a growing sense that if we don't act soon, we're going to be in trouble. Yeah.
Lita, your thoughts, because you work in the ESD space, and as we've seen in the outcomes of the report, this is where, again, there's a great expectation for a lot more work to be done. But again, the perception that it's just a box-ticking exercise still continues to exist in the market.
For me, it starts here. You need to be able to link the performance of enterprise development, more especially around procurement, to management. So in any company that I've done, I've worked for more than 4 listed companies. I first look at who is the management, then I can already extrapolate who's the suppliers. There is a direct correlation. Any company that resists management
I think you need to say that again for it to sink in. I think you need to say that again for it to sink in.
I'm saying that for me, when I enter into a company, I just need to look at the management, and I can already make a correlation. Who are the suppliers? And the more they resist management, it goes without saying they're going to resist pressure procurement. The other 2 elements from an ESD and looking at supplier development, that are neither here or there, because you can actually do it without doing much, right? And unfortunately, black people are not taking this battle seriously of management control. They are not. They are more interested in procurement, but you can't have this without having that.
Yeah.
And it's for black people to start rising and saying, if we're not in positions of decision making, you cannot even decide who the supplier is. And unfortunately, when you're in ESD, you are caught in this quagmire of trying to transform procurement with people, right, that are not reflective of the society you want to bring in.
Yeah.
And it becomes very difficult to sell that, right? And even when you look at employment equity, I know that other black races have got far more representation, by the way, outside white.
Correct.
If they are there, you can also see the suppliers, it's the same. Right? So we have to be able to look at it that as activists in the ESD, we are subjected to management, which now raises the issue around what's the role of the Social and Ethics Committee?
Yep.
And the quality of people that are sitting there, and to what extent are they understanding? And I was happy with Undate, who said, I work for the department, but I have no clue of the scorecard, which the department therefore cannot oversight BE because you cannot transform what you don't understand. Right? It's the same if you look at Social and Ethics Committee, look at the skills. It's a concoction of everything, but if you look into nominations, HR, you look at your audit, it's finance.
Got you.
You know, so because there is a lack of understanding the code to the level to which it's discussed here at a board, therefore EXCO can do whatever they want. And we become victims at a divisional level of these structures that don't make sense.
100%. And what I'm hearing here is that there's also a level of a trust deficit, right, that continues to exist to make sure that we can access management and control, and that will translate into proper progress when it comes to ESD. So perhaps if we can go back to this tough conversation that needs to take place to say, I am fearful, and yet you want an opportunity, and we have to meet each other halfway as people of different races and backgrounds in South Africa to make sure that our vision is united. How does that need to change? What kind of conversations need to happen here? And how in-depth do we need to go to make sure that we say we need a full-on, multi-pronged approach here?
It's a patronage system. People don't understand. So when you enter into procurement, people have got their suppliers. Procurement divisions, they facilitate a process for someone else, which is the business unit. The business unit decides who they buy from. Right? So the fear is losing the patronage system, which some of the elements within it have got corruption elements, where you use this one so that you can pay for my holiday. It happens in the private sector also. Right? So protecting that patronage system is fundamental to not dismantle the supply chain by bringing people that you do not know. Not only you said they don't know you, they don't know a supplier, whether I can go to them and they can do things for me. Therefore, I will protect. And that's where the defense mechanism actually comes in, is to protect those interests based on the networks that have been built over years and the patronage system that runs within the procurement, which you'll find it's deep-rooted in management, who are the people who decide who they do business with.
Old boys club, family connections, networks, coming from the same school and familiarity in terms of background. And whilst that's understandable, because in as much as we're trying to ensure that we widen up the pool, this is not a cease and desist kind of fight and a takeover, right? We're looking for collaborative efforts here. I don't want to keep you quiet for too long, Mamgela. I want you to come in here because you primarily work within the financial services sector. A very important role to unlock capital, to assist black-owned businesses in order to grow, scale, and of course, access markets. But of course, as per the report, again, fronting remains a major challenge here when it comes to ownership. Share your observations again when it does come to fronting and of course, the perceptions that exist out there, but more importantly, how we can shift those realities in terms of what you've seen.
Good morning, Gugu. Good morning, everyone, and thanks again for the opportunity. I suppose fronting is an interesting thing for me when I have to think about it in the context of BEE, because I actually think about fronting from a broader transformational ambit first before we get to business. And if you kind of just bear me for a few seconds, talk about transforming management and kind of get to the executive levels, as Uputsi had mentioned. Very often you find in big corporates in South Africa, you've got roles that have got nothing to do with the actual money making of the business itself, being roles that are carved out for black people, pretty much. And those are numbers that go all the way up to the top level, when a lot of these corporates are reporting kind of the statistics around the executives and the management participation. Now, that is fronting. The fact that it's not BE and there's no money exchange, that's fronting. Now, what's scary and even more scary is that fronting is done to and with, collaboratively with black people that are highly educated, that have went to school and that are happy to hold a paper and say, I sit here in this board, but you know your value here is so minuscule. How do you sit there and actually represent something that you know your name is going there, Parliament, saying you are the executive management team and you're black here? So you start there first, you think, actually, then the fronting in the PE, it's more really kind of big because there's numbers involved, but it's nothing new. And luckily for us, I come from a township school where you went to school and there was no spell it or blazer for passing maths with A. And a lot of people that come to from these schools where with white people are involved, where you run around and you do well in sports, you wear a scarf alone or you wear a blazer. Those are the people that we have in corporate today where, you look at black people on LinkedIn celebrating every little thing, getting awards, but one simple thing no one looks at is transparency in pay in the corporate place. Sure. So if people are in corporate, if together we're in corporate and we've been there for 10 years together doing the same thing, no one bothers to check to say the white guy or girl whose name is not in the newspapers, who's not celebrated, who's not on LinkedIn, but who in business, who doesn't have the better position than me, do they earn the same amount of money as I, or am I just getting the stage and no money? Yeah. Because ultimately money is in fashion, right? So you start there. That's commerciality. If you can't take care of that commerciality in your own career, forget it in business where there's billions involved. Like that we're always going to come last there. So there is fronting. It's and I'm sorry to say that it's blatant, but the fronting that I've seen is not a fronting where someone takes someone who's their helper and put them in their PE certificate. No, it's fronting when Mamkeli, who understands finance, and Andile, who understands finance, goes to buy a business that is worth 100 million for 200 million rand with a vendor finance of 50 million rand, where there's over 50 million rand in overvaluation and the cost of capital is 20%, which means Andile and Mamkel will never make money out of this thing, but they're there because it's much nicer to say, yeah, we own this thing, hey, with my mate. And when you do that, you're actually fronting because you're actually not going to get any value. You're sitting there allocating a seat only for you to be Googleable, but have no money at the end of the day.
I think this is a very important point that you've mentioned, and you've probably shifted gears on this conversation. Because it takes us back to the reality and, of course, the perceptions that we often have about BE, right, and the initial days of its implementation in South Africa as to we need to reframe the thinking around triple BE and what it's actually meant to achieve beyond just being Googleable. Disa, I've kept you quiet for too long, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this one, but an open one to the panel. Disa, if you could lead the way. Given the outcomes that we see in the gauge for this year, some verification industries saying, well, we probably just need a complete overhaul of these BE policies or realigning how best they actually meet the objectives, because it clearly sounds as though it's a mindset challenge that needs to take place right across the stream.
Good morning, Gugu. Thank you. I actually think we do need an overhaul. And I liked one of the speakers said that when we keep saying it's voluntary, that's where the problem is. It's mandatory. So we need to start having those conversations. When it's legislated, what does it mean? So we are an authority as Mersita. So what we do is we give out grants. If you do training, and you see we do well with training, but the report does show that it's just to tick a box. But the critical skills that are needed to drive the economy, we're not training on them. So the kind of training, when we receive our WSPs, it's the soft skills. But we were shocked because as a CETA, we're going across the country mapping the skills development needs of each province. And we were shocked, for example, that the Northwest doesn't have any engineers. How does that make sense when the Northwest is a mining belt? Now, as an authority who have been in existence for the last 22 years, what have we done about that? Is it okay to just look at the WSP and say, okay, this is how much they need, let's give it to them? We must be authoritative about it. So what we've done, we've said that in order to qualify, we said this to our stakeholders, who are not here, by the way, because we are the manufacturing CETA, and they're not here. We said to them, to qualify for the discretionary part of the grant, you must have a BE certificate. And none of them, well, not none, but a very small percentage of them do qualify. And as a result, we've been having conversations after conversation about how can this be scrapped out of the requirement. And if we continue allowing those conversations, fortunately for Mersita, we've said it's not negotiable. If you want us to give you money, this is what you need to qualify.
Yep.
So the other thing is an overhaul, these conversations, government must be a big part of these conversations in terms of how much is government willing to tolerate. Now, I was part of the delegation, for example, with the Minister of Electricity when he went to China. And I saw in each and every speech that he did, when they were talking about bringing investment into the country, and part of the conversations would be what would be willing to sell Eskom, for example. And it was very clear that it's not up for discussion. So if we can have those brave conversations and say, if we want to transform, especially this sector, my sector, the manufacturing, I mean, the only way to drive the economy is that. And you'll see that in the sector alone, for example, we've got 460,000 workers.
Yes.
And 70% of that are coming from large companies. These companies who don't want to comply. And now, how do we change and make sure that these companies, that where most of our workers are sitting, and most of them are in these artisan positions, only 9% are in, as you're saying, that they're in management positions. So they are there for the face to tick that box to say, okay, we're training our people, they take them for I don't know, give me training, health and health training, fire building, I don't know. But the critical skills are not, we are not training on them.
Definitely.
So we must have honest conversations.
Yes.
We must be bold about it. We must insist. And I was saying to the minister, for example, if they want to bring, we've got the capital. If you want us to sell your product, surely we can have a say about what you, for example, transfer the skills and let our people participate.
Got you.
Yeah.
I want to extend it to the rest of the panelists just to get their thinking and thoughts as well around the overhaul completely, which you say is what we actually need to go for. Lita, you shaking your head.
Not really. I don't think we need a big overhaul, right? I'll do an example. In India, when their ANC lost and the new party came in, one of the things that they said they're going to do, because when their ANC left, there was less than 2% of women in boards across India. President came in and said, please guys, can you do this? Like any corporate, they didn't. Change the Companies Act, give them a year, 20% fine if you don't do it, thank you very much. And all the stock exchange were given the power to fine. It moved from 2% to 18% within 5 years. Right?
Let's talk about those fines. How substantial were they? Because
They
we
are
know that the
10%.
JSE has rules and regulations, but when
10%
this
of
came
your
late
profit,
concerns, there was discomfort, right?
10%, and it was not discussed. South Africa said discusser. You don't discuss it, 10%, and make it very clear. If you don't achieve A, B happens. That's it. You can go into your own corner and complain about it. It's neither here or there. Come the time when you are reviewed, you don't achieve, there is 10% you achieve, congratulations. And that is what the codes, we need to do with the codes. We need to be punitive. Yabonga Xhosa City, baxhomisa ngenyoka efileyo. We know, uMinister xa esithi sizanifine, he's actually not going to do it.
Yeah.
Up until he does that, then you start to see, because the shareholders are going to start complaining, Guti, why are you killing value? 10% is gone just because you don't want to do something that is not right for the country. So to me, it's the punitive side that is absolutely lacking. And unfortunately, we can talk till we blue. Until you find people, nothing's going to happen. Discussion, you can change the codes. Absolutely nothing's going to happen.
Just budget for the fines.
They won't
They
budget
can
for
afford-
10%.
They can afford to.
Well, I can tell you they do. But over and above that, there's a principle that we're not addressing. That the economics run the politics.
Correct.
That is the nature of our country. It's the people who have the money who determine what happens, if we are to be honest with each other. You look at the Amendment Act, and the extent to which there's been so much of an uproar, and you look at who's making the noise. It's the people who are sitting with the money. I don't hear black people coming up and saying, we stand for this, we stand by it, we will also go to court. Why is that not happening? It's the people who have the money, who can go to court, who can drag the cases till their kingdom come, that will make sure that this Amendment Act will never be implemented. And I think to a large extent, we're not talking about the fact that the way, the tail, what is the saying in English? Where the tail wags the dog? And until, right? And until we get to that place where countries like Malaysia were bold enough to say, we're not having Big Brother.
Yeah.
And now I'm speaking as Tabia. Please get me right. We're not having Big Brother. We're not going to have somebody dictate terms to us.
Correct.
This is our country. This is how it's going to be done. And anybody who doesn't want to do it the way we want it to be done is welcome to leave.
Ooh.
Yeah? We're not brave. Let me tell you something.
Can we afford to do that, given the economics of the country right now?
Let me tell you, let me give you an example, a lived experience. I've consulted in Botswana for Botswana. And when I went there, I was told straight, you are an expert. You are going to train this person. Because the reason why you're here is because they don't have the skill. As you do the work, you transfer the skill because you're here for this period and this period only. And we're not apologetic about it. I can speak as much Setswana as I want and pretend I'm in Botswana. But at the end of the day, written on my forehead, invisible, was, you are an expert. Now, our country has legislation that says that when you bring in foreign nationals at top management, they are given work permits that are supposed to last for a certain period. But the reality is that it keeps getting extended and extended and extended. My question is why? Why is it that as a country we're not getting to a place where we're saying skills development has got to work for us? And there must be real transfer of skill. We need this, we need you as much as you need us. And therefore, we're both going to make it work. And I think we need to get to a place where we are brave enough as a country to take the bull by its horns.
Sure. I can tell you, though, that part of those, when we went, right, the MOU that is being signed, for example, in terms of skills development, whatever they bring in, there is an element that whatever you'll be doing, you will transfer skills. So if we were to do that in all spheres of our economies, you insist on it, not just BEE, procurement, all aspects of the legislation, because again, later, they can afford to budget. I don't think we should be, it's like, to stop doing that, is that bad, right? I'll hit you. You don't say I'll hit you. If you do that, you're going to fall. And that's why I'm saying government will really be key to drive these conversations. It may take longer us to get to the same way, the MO that Botswana uses, and say, you will transfer the skills, but we need to get there.
Exactly. Taking the bull by the horns. We've got about 16 more minutes left for this conversation, and I can imagine that there's many of you that have a lot of views and themes that you'd like to share with our panelists, and of course engage them even further on just exactly how we can shift the needle and the radar. So we will take the opportunity just to gauge if there are any questions in the room. Happy for you to also use the QR code that is available on either side of the screen to share your questions, but I think the live interaction is what we're looking for here within the room. Those of you online as well, please feel free to keep your questions coming through. Any questions in the room, please do raise your hand. There is a roving mic that will be available. I see 2 hands. We'll start in the front with Vieira, if I'm not mistaken, and there's a hand at the back that I've also noted. We'll come to you. Please make sure you keep your questions short and sharp to make sure that we address it to the right panelist.
Thanks, Gugu. I think my question is to the 2 gentlemen, and this thought just dawned while I was sitting listening to them. So there's something that Mr. VT shared that I stumbled upon the other day and said, we can't dispute the competence of the apartheid government, right? And indirectly, we all know what the government of South Africa has done to our economy from a fraud and corruption perspective. And as much as I'm for transformation and as much as I'm for representation, I can't help but wonder, from a corrupt state currently in the supply chain, if we had to take over this country, whether we will not follow the same trajectory that the government of today has followed. As much as we're pushing for transformation, as much as we're pushing for our faces to be forward, following what the government of today has done to this country, will we not by implication follow the same trajectory?
Sure. Interesting question. Lita?
Right. For me, I don't think that's the case, right? Because also if you look at the whole history of who corrupted who. So pretty much you're getting to people who are the masters of that game. So they would never allow you to dictate how corruption works because they've been doing it for years. So there can't be that fear. The issue is that they wouldn't allow that you take some of the patronage to yourself because they are already feeding from it. That is why the conundrum, or they will allow you to do some bits and pieces there to control the bigger portion of the opportunities. That environment is highly controlled in terms of who gets in, right? I think Mfethu talked about some of the appointments that are made that are almost token appointments. It's purely because you get given the post, but you don't get the delegation. You don't get the power, because through power you are able to exert certain things. I mean, I read now there is a CFO who lasted 16 days, a black CFO, 16 days out of here. So that environment is controlled once you start to touch on a specific aspect. That is why it's never gonna get to the same issues as your municipalities or the government.
Got you. We'll take another question from the back of the room, and we've got a few online that I've also noted. You can go ahead, ma'am.
The problem is not about reporting. The problem is about understanding legislative framework. You remember, and how we're going to develop whoever that needs to be competitive in our space or different sectors. Now, to all the panels, the BE talks about, Section 9 talks about 10% community trust, preferential equity share. From where I'm standing, from Sandparks, that 10% will enable me to develop a competitive shareholder, a competitive operator in the long run. So I'm using that as a tool, also as an economic model, business model. But now, if you come into the space, you don't master your own space, myself as Hilda, and I allow myself to be bought, I'm not going to do anything. Nobody can buy me if I understand my space. But because I don't understand my space, I will be bought, I will do the wrong things, and then I will complain. If we're looking at government, the entire department are black people. Why are we not, with the highest purchasing power, are we not effecting change? So we also need to critically look at ourselves and say, are we doing justice to ourselves? And stop complaining. Thank you.
Fair point. Thank you so much. Anyone keen to take that? No, Zizwe?
No, not that one.
I like that. Well, there's a lot of feedback that we're getting, and I think it's really quite critical that we do unpack the various aspects of it. And Mamkeli, there's also a question that's come through here from one of our guests online. Actually from Andile, if I'm not mistaken. He asks, are BE deals still happening? No staff deals, but real black investors acquiring and building businesses that were previously white-owned? And is that still the best way to go about deploying capital and transforming the economy?
Short answer, yes, they are still happening, unfortunately, because they are happening to businesses, to white businesses that are old, that are overvalued, and that are going backwards. So the one time where you're seeing the biggest activity on empowerment transaction from a banker's point of view, you kind of know the maths, and fortunately, because of how predictable it is, it saved us a lot of time from entering some of these DD rooms, because otherwise we wouldn't be sleeping, right? You know, okay, this business is probably not going anywhere. It's probably underperforming. It's got a key contract that needs to be unlocked because of empowerment, and essentially, it's basically the founders are going overseas. They want to sell at the top end and leave, and the revenue and EBITDA on the floor, but the minute black people come in, it's going to be a hockey stick. It's going to do so well. I mean, we're basically seeing a lot of those transactions at the moment. I mean, and obviously there is no funding for them, because I think Gugu did ask me a question about that. There's no funding for them because there's no funding for a business that will not make money. You know, like, we're not in the business of funding people to just own businesses if they're not for profit. You know, so that's one thing, I guess. So maybe that's one on the PE transactions. And then secondly, I suppose, which is a good question around, is it the right place for black people to be really putting capital in place? I think it maybe is a segue for me to another point I was thinking about, that we obviously spoken about all the negatives and that has happened about BEE over the last, call it, since the dawn of BEE to now. The one thing, an area that we've been lucky in, is that there has been value in terms of monetary terms that's been created for various black entities. Yes. Now, and I think the last time we were in a similar event, I think I made mention that there's probably northwards of 100 billion that is sitting within black investment holding companies or in that ecosystem in some form. Now, you look at that and say, you can look at that in two ways, right? You can look at that and say it's still small relative to the bigger pie. You can look at it and say, well, it's a smaller grouping relative to the population of black people. Or you can look at it and say, at least we're lucky that there's value and money that is sitting in black hands. Now, what that lack creates for us, because in my view, any grouping of people, whether it's black or any grouping of people, you can really get out of the rings of poverty to become industrious and potentially build multiple generational businesses when there is an ability to mobilize within your own network. So it's never, I mean, BEE for me was always cute. It was never gonna, like it's never, there's no way it can take us and create billionaires. So for Andile to become a billionaire, it's not because of a code. You can write a code however you want. It's not gonna do that. So that's not gonna happen.
Maybe
he's gonna
that's
be
the point.
billionaire
What should we be
because
doing then to make sure that
he's
we
gonna
change
be
that narrative?
He's gonna get there because no, you keep the narrative because what it's doing, what BEE has done, which I'm grateful for, it's created opportunities for the likes of us. I mean, we're sitting at the banks now. Some of us, our clients are black and have been black for the last 10 years. And we've actually been doing business with our own people and we're employing people that we know and thankfully we like as well because it's our time also to do that. And it's been quite fantastic. People are building careers. There's a lot of value chain here that without BEE would not be happening. There's businesses that have started. But the most important thing, though, about what moves the dial in the economy is when Andile starts using his networks in the main of the groupings that have made money already, where he finds a business that is unique, where he thinks he can add value in there. He goes to his counterparts and networks to say, guys, there's a deal we can do together. I am believable to you because some of you are my mentors. You've been with me through the journey. I don't have capital. You guys have capital, because you benefited in BEE the first time around. And within that groupings, they come to Mamkeli in the bank, where we say, maybe Andile's balance sheet is tiny, but with Kgosana Capital, given that we know them and they're big, working with Andile, we think now suddenly we can give Andile a chance. Andile starts building a business. Yeah. He starts becoming a player in the market. He starts building his own. He's not there because of BEE necessarily. He's there because, and maybe for me, forget whether it's BEE or not, think about what is he becoming. 10, 20 years' time, he becomes a wealthy, multi-generational sector expert who happens to be black. But most importantly, building a multi-generational businesses, building things that makes us in the corporate space sit and say, actually, because Andile is a black client is big at RMB, he can come in then and demand to have a black deal maker dealing with him in the deals. Yeah. That then talks to the management team because where there's money, people will actually listen. This whole thing of management must be black just because we feel like it, never going to work until there's money driving it.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think we can come back to that one because there's been a critical question asked whether or not we need to develop our own financial services institutions. And we forget that we also have informal savings, which are still locked. If you think about the stockfile community, 40 billion, I believe, was the last count that existed, which is almost similar to the market cap of ShopRite. Surely that's capital that can be unlocked. Or other institutions and individuals who can unlock that capital. Financial services, do we need to collate and introduce our own money, as you mentioned, to...
I think you do that, but I don't think you do that and be conspicuous while you're doing it. Because when you do that, you're going to get knocked. Let me make one example. There's a bank that was being sold by the Reserve Bank recently, and it was all in the market. We all saw what happened to that process. A couple of people called us, and you get a call to say, hey, I'm looking to do this. What do you think? Is the process going to make sense? Is it going to succeed? Then you simply say, well, this is not going to succeed because you can't go and say you want to sell a bank to black people only. Because what's going to happen is then I'm going to lend money to Andile is going to say, I bank I'm not going to return the money.
Yeah.
You can't do that. I think what you do though, you build yourself a financial services quietly. It happens to be black. But you don't go out saying, I want to try and do this. Couple of examples that I actually think we need to really think about, especially for me, what's important is the lift as you rise, especially in the black, call it professional setup. If you think about the communities that we all come from, there's always an entrepreneur there who's doing something small, who needs 50,000 rand, 10,000 rand. The way you think about unlocking value for those people, that's how Andile should think about value being unlocked for him from people above him. And that's how this thing works. So effectively, you easily could create a bank that is black, because out of the 100 billion rand I'm talking about, it is leverageable by financiers at far more cheaper prices. I mean, if you look at the cost of capital for some of the bigger black economic empowered businesses today, it's very, very kind of, call it largely investment grade. In that case, that means they can go raise money from banks and they go and lend money to black emerging businesses at a clip, and they can still make a lot of money. So it can be created in an implied manner, in my view.
Lita, you had a point that you wanted to add on.
I mean, BE gives you a foot in the door. You know, from a procurement perspective, I've had a situation, for example, at Woolies, where we got someone in, and within a space of 3 years, they were supplying all the retailers, right? They use that opportunity of getting in. So it's just that people want to entrench themselves where they are at, and yet there are limited opportunities. Whereas when they start to get into those networks and spread into other, you know, like-minded corporates, you know, you start finding that people are starting to grow those businesses. Even when I was at Tiger Brands, we used to get farmers to come in and said, now you should be able to go to RCL, you know, Pioneer, because that is how they start to grow and not be dependent on the growth of the company you're supplying. Because if you supply one company, if they grow, you grow. If they don't, you don't, right? To make sure that you are able to spread your wings, you should be able to make sure that you diversify your customers, which is where the community of practice comes in as practitioners. That part of what we want to do, that's why we're mobilizing practitioners, is also if someone is working for Pick and Pay and here's someone who works for another retailer, they've got this supplier, they can start sharing suppliers to grow them.
Exactly.
It's not only the SMMEs who must run around, we also know each other in the ESD space. You know, you find one engineering company has made it at Exaro, they should be able to go, you know, and supply another, you know, mining firm. And that is how transformation should be measured, to the extent to which, you know, people are able to navigate. And the other thing that people don't know, many black companies actually get bought out once they start hitting 50, 100. So people are saying, Ziku Bapa Wandamnyama. They are there, but others they've cashed out. Because they've got lucrative contracts, which again is another element of economic development that people don't necessarily see. Unfortunately, being ESD, when you see someone selling out, you're like, oh man, we've done so much work to get you there, right? And now you're selling, but you understand that in terms of economics, I mean, it's part of the game.
100%. Nozizwe, you wanted to add, there's also a question here that was asked about the contribution that financial services agencies and institutions like RMB, Sanlam, are making and investing towards businesses in South Africa, black-owned businesses specifically. So maybe if you can add that onto your response as well.
Sure. Now, I was going to say we'd be remiss to have a conversation about BEE, I think, and not talk about measurement. So what are we measuring? Are we measuring spend? Are we measuring compliance? Or are we measuring shifting the developmental needle in the country? I think that's what we need to shift the conversation to. So in the space of ESD, are we measuring how much revenue we've increased in those companies? Are we measuring how much procurement those companies get in the corporates? Are we measuring how much jobs have been created? So I think we really have to be careful. And I think that the fact that we've been so compliance focused in the BEE space and not on the developmental progress that we're making has been a big issue. And I think that theories of change should be just the norm for every single corporate. What is your theory of change in terms of your BEE scorecard?
Maybe take us in and indulge us from a Sanlam point of view. We spoke about the difference between listed and unlisted companies. Sanlam is listed and perhaps falls under that category. But what are you doing to make sure that you not only meet your targets, but there's measurable outcomes to the change that you'd like to implement?
Happily. So at the Sanlam Foundation, which we're the biggest contributor to the BBBEE scorecard of the group, we have a theory of change for overall for the foundation, but we have a theory of change for each of the pillars that we work on. So that's socioeconomic development, that's consumer financial education, and enterprise and supply development. And the point is that when we link to the SDGs as well as to the NDP. So if you're not seeing an incremental move in the right direction, then you've got to go back to the drawing board and redress what it is that you're doing. So what I'm saying is that what's frightening, Gugu, is that not all companies that do BEE have a theory of change. Not all of them have those measures. They're only measuring the spend and they're only measuring the compliance, but not actually what the outcomes and the outputs are at the end of those programs. So I'm saying that shift is a big one that needs to take place, I think, in the industry. And what I would advocate for is some sort of a centralization. That's what I argue for in the article I wrote in the Gauge, is that there's some sort of centralization, for example, in SED, where we are actually going above and over-indexing. What we should do is have an overall theory of change. Because I mean, in SED, guys, if we're going to be competing in SED, then I don't know what. So things like early childhood development, things like the environmental activities that we have. We should really have a centralized system where we're all working towards the same theory of change. We're all measuring for the same things, and we're all putting aside things like branding and things that are actually not about ultimately what is for the good of those communities. So yeah, I think that these are the shifts, these are the thoughts that we have to start having, and these brave, courageous conversations that we have to start having amongst ourselves. So what are we measuring?
Definitely. What are we measuring? We are running out of time slightly, but I'm hoping I can steal just 2 more minutes, Andile, if I give every speaker 30 seconds to wrap up with their concluding remarks. Of course, we're really appreciative of the feedback and the questions that many of you have shared, and we do want to wrap it up, sir, unfortunately. But I do think what we're hearing from this conversation is, number one, a trust deficit. We need to ensure that we're able to have those in-depth conversations with each other opposite a table to ensure how do I let you in and how do you come in. Another critical aspect that I do think we need to conclude on is, of course, understanding the fact that we need to mobilize access to capital, but also investment in our people, understanding the shift and change in our mindset when it comes to triple BE policies also remains imperative. And most importantly, not only an incentive for businesses as well as government to comply, but also ensuring that penalties need to apply where there is a level of non-compliance. But to wrap it up within the minute and a half that we do have, as has been mentioned, we don't want to be here in the next year, never mind 10, talking about the same problem. And given the various aspects of transformation that you all represent, whether it be skills development, ownership, socioeconomic development, ESD, and of course taking a look at management control, I'd like us to conclude with one thing that each of us can implement or think differently about within our businesses that speak to the respective roles that you serve in, that we can implement, discuss, and most importantly, shift gears on to make sure that in a year's time, the outcomes of the Gauge look different. Disa, I'd like to start with you as we make our way down the panel. 30 seconds, quite literally.
So what we've done as a CETA, we've said, if we're going to give you money, you must spend 30% of it on women. So probably what we could do is we could increase that number if you want to see more representation of women.
Could or you will?
Well, we will.
Okay.
We will. We will. So we will probably when we come back next year, we'll come and say we made a different decision. Now we've made it 50%, which is where it should be, or even higher. So, and the other thing that we can do is what we're doing in terms of transformation is we are focusing on skills of the future.
About 10 seconds.
Okay, skills of the future, focus on young people so that they have the right mind to take on all these bright conversations forward.
Got you. 35%, we'll look out for it next year. Mamkeli, what can we do to shift on ownership?
So I think what's important from my end, Gugu, is really creating the right collaborative mindset in partnership. So if you're an operator, partner with someone who understands finance, or so basically partner with someone who can actually who's better at selling, and let's have these conversations on the side. I think what I found disappointing is that we quickly want to rush and go to a bank's credit committee with an idea that we don't sound among each other as kind of colleagues on the side, which we can help create bankability.
100%. No, Zizwe?
Sure. So 2 things. First one is what are we measuring and how are we measuring it, and trying to get some sort of a unified, so that we are measuring the same things in the same way. The second thing is definitely, like Gilly's saying, is collaboration. So if I'm running an education project in a rural area and I'm focusing on what I'm doing inside the classrooms, so whether it's numeracy, literacy, etc., and another corporate in the same sector or not, are focusing on infrastructure, why not collaborate?
Exactly.
And you get the amplifier effect, and you get to scale up on programs and make the money go further. So
Unfair question.
collaboration.
Has Sanlam identified any partners in the room and maybe want to break some news?
Not at this particular room, but we're talking. There's lots of collaborations, as you know. There's MTN, there's Allianz, etc., and we're looking right now very hard at how it is that we can collaborate with those partners.
Got you. Lita?
For me, firstly, is I know that so when you were at DTI, the procurement was a separate pillar. We need to go back to that so that we can measure it differently. And you'll see that that is the element we need to make sure it transformed, because that has a knock-on effect on supply development and enterprise development, and also management. Those two will tie together. Secondly, is developing the skill set of the practitioners who are doing the work, which talks to the theory of change, because you need to train them to have that capacity. And thirdly, the biggest issue is financing gap for ESD. Some of the ESD guys get the opportunity. I've seen it in my world, but I didn't have the money. The 3% of NPAT was not enough to unlock R1 billion procurement, right? So we need to do that collaboration, and the Competition Commission has to come in so that competitors can be able to collaborate. Because currently now there's an issue around colluding and all of that. But we need to collaborate in rural towns, in township, in order for us to make the difference.
Definitely. Tabia, your closing remarks?
So for me, 2 areas where we need to change. I believe that we need to get to a place where, and I know I might trample on a few toes, but get to a place where management and control is measured by compliance to employment equity, period. If you have a compliance certificate, you've got your score on management and control. And the reason being, the way in which we've crafted the Amendment Act right now is that it not only looks at affirmative action, it also looks at the corporate culture. It looks at elements of discrimination that are not often spoken about, which then says, if we can do that, we know that we've got cultures that are healthy, cultures that are run on purpose and not only on money, cultures that take into consideration the importance of stakeholders, the importance of employee engagement, because if employees are not engaged, you will not make the profits that you want to make. And finally, cultures where the community gives a company that operates a social license to operate.
100%. We'll leave it there for today. Very important takeaways that we've certainly heard here today, and perhaps opportunities that we can also grasp at to make sure that we do implement solutions. One comment, though, really did intrigue me from the chat online, where one person indicated that this might be possible, but we haven't really focused on the macroeconomics of the country. So until we're able to see some sense of economic growth, power generation, and of course, a growing economy, perhaps some of these endeavors might be slowed down by the macroeconomic impacts. And that's perhaps something that we do need to be cognizant of, but not deterred by. Thank you so much to my panelists for joining us and giving us some insight. Lots that's been shared. Please give them a round of applause as we make our way off stage. Back to Andile.
Another round of applause for Gugu and her panel. Thank you, sirs. Thank you, sir. Wow. You know, when you have such a great panel, such a good conversation of people that are experts at what they do, awufuni by trying to summarize. You know, you'll be that guy, people will look at you and be like, Andile, why? So I'm not going to summarize. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to hijack an individual that's in our audience. Ma'am, do you mind giving that gentleman the microphone? He is the BEE Commissioner of South Africa. This entire policy that we are here gathering, debating, researching, all the work and the funds that, Mr. Chairman, your organization gives to us, and we spend on research, we do this report, we do this event. What we're trying to keep alive, he and his office are solely responsible for making sure it works. So I think it would be improper not to give him just an opportunity to reflect. I'm not going to bring you on stage because I know you don't like the limelight, but please, just a reflection.
No, I need to stand in the light so that people can see me. Oh, all right, even better, even better.
Please come on stage.
Thank you, Program Director. Let me appreciate all of you in your diversity, in your wisdom, and say that this has been a very, very rich conversation. Let's not underestimate the value of pausing and coming together and reflecting on the journey. This is a journey, definitely. Transformation was never going to be an event. It is complex. And I think that it requires that we focus on all of the levers to see that they work together to move things forward. So if I go back to what the chairperson said, the chairperson of Sanlam said at the beginning, as if he knew, that the conversation will give us precisely that we're not throwing the baby with the bathwater. This thing is too important to simply walk away from. I just want to make two observations. Let me start with the one represented by a forum like today. It does require conversations. It does require us sharing experiences, sharing lessons. No single individual can traverse the journey alone. So comparing notes, talking also particularly at the leadership level. And it's just so fortuitous that we're doing this on Nelson Mandela's birthday. Because in the morning when I reflected on it, where, if he were alive today, where would he think we are on this imperative of economic justice? All right? I'm sure, like me, we're very optimistic. We thought we would be much further than we are. But it is important that we continue to soldier on. So talking the leadership conversation, because if the leaders, if the executives, the chairpersons, the CEOs, the CFOs are not in this conversation, I think it is going to be a problem. It cannot be outsourced. This thing cannot be outsourced. So we need to do that. I think that the role of the government, absolutely important. I don't think, again, let's not throw government, with the baby of government with the bathwater. Definitely, there are concerns about the credibility, the reputation of the state, its capacity. But this is not going to happen without government. Because only government makes laws, all right? So there's moral suasion, moral persuasion that will come from conversations, doing the right thing. The whole world says corporates, we all have to do the right things in environments in which we work. We must be part of that. BEE is a foot in that. ESG is a foot in that. But the state also must promote behavior, correct behavior. So whether in BEE as a state we have the right incentives, sticks and carrots are balanced, this is something that we need to reflect. I think that we need to revisit that area, as it were. But it has to be both. It can't just be the stick without the conversations, without the carrots, as it were. So thank you very much for a very informative, very rich conversation. I feel better at the end of this than I arrived, and that's the value of attending forums of very wise people who are on the same side of this issue. At least I'm in the company of people who are on the same side. So we are all travelers on this journey, and I look forward to further engagements with yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was an important moment of improvisation. And you're right, we're all on the same side. I think even for all of us who were there when we started this journey, I don't think we ever, I think to some extent we did, but I don't think we understood the extent of the importance of what we are doing. If we let the foot off this pedal, a lot of those gains of the man that we remember on this day will be undone. So it's a really important thing to be done. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the end of our formalities, and I'm going to ask my other boss. I have many bosses in this room, but she's definitely the boss of the Sanlam Gauge. I'm speaking about the Chief Transformation Officer at Sanlam Group, Ms. Rayanne Cedrus.
Thank you, Andile. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. This is my third Sanlam Gauge, or Sanlam Transformation Gauge event. And I must say, from the very early days of 2021 to now, it's really evolved. I look at the room and I see the people in the room, and I look at the conversations we've had. And I particularly like the panel conversation. It was so rich and authentic. I think the BBEE Commissioner captured it very well. But we're celebrating our democracy's father's birthday today. And like you, BBEE Commissioner, I was reflecting this morning as well. What would he have said? What would he have said around the progress we've made in South Africa? And when we say we, you know, we tend to always look at others when we say we. But in fact, it's all of us. Every single one of us have a role to play, whether it be in your homes, whether it be in the corporate environment, whether it be in the communities that you serve, whether it be in your church groupings. I think we all play a vital role to help this country move forward. And so we heard the good, the bad, and the ugly of BBEE, and by the way, that's a movie. And I'd still want to believe in my lifetime, and I am a fair age already, that we'll still see this democracy turn to what we intended it to be. We'll still see society become more inclusive, become more diverse, and equitable at the end of the day for the masses in South Africa. So I've heard a lot about, you know, building entrepreneurs and creating those big corporate black businesses. But I don't think we must take our eye off the ball. There's masses of South Africans that need to be brought along with us as well. And I certainly think that's definitely a role that we as Sanlam would like to play. The BBEE Commissioner, you've actually, you know, stole a lot of the points that I was going to make in my closing remarks, but you've, you know, helped me along here. So there's two key points that I took out of today. And I think I said it, Andile, in the previous two gauges. So you know, obviously it's a theme coming through all the time. And Vera, you acknowledged it very well in the fact that we're speaking, but we have to put action into words, or words into action. And that requires us to start working together more. As corporates, we tend to protect our brands. And Azizwe spoke about that competitiveness around dealing with these societal perils. We have to put those things to the side and see how we can collectively work on addressing some serious societal perils facing our country, where we can reduce poverty, you know, help SMMEs prosper, and by so doing, create jobs. When we create jobs, we take our people and we lift them out, and we create pride in this country again. So I decided my message would be what Madiba would potentially say. We need to instill hope in our youth. So where do we take it from here? Collaboration, key enabler. And Sanlam is, you know, for the past year and a bit, have focused tremendously on finding opportunities of collaborating. Think of our colleagues in the sandbox environment, some of the stuff we're doing with our YES colleagues here as well. And we're looking for more opportunities like that. And certainly what we're saying as Sanlam, we're putting our hand out into any corporate, any government department. We're saying, come and work with us. Invite us in. and let us evaluate how we can collectively support addressing some of these critical social ills that is facing our country. So really, all that's left for me to say is I challenge every single one of you, think about what role you can play and reach out to somebody else and collectively work on some very critical issues that is facing our country. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for those online for signing in. And I wish you safe travels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rayanne, and thanks for taking us back to recognizing the day today. And of course, the day was not just about the launch of the 2023 Sanlam Transformation Gauge report, but it is also, and I'm pretty sure many of you, when you leave here, you're going to be doing something on your special Mandela Day. Speaking of the Mandela Day, the foundation, the Mandela Foundation, is on a specific drive this year about planting a tree. And we thought we'll help you out. So if you are doing nothing on your Mandela Day, I'm giving you a gift, but you need to do your side of the bargain, okay? The gift I'm giving you is a spekboom plant. So this is a plant that is quite resilient. It doesn't need a lot of care, it needs some care, okay? So we're gonna give you a spekboom plant, which you're gonna take along with your report as well. So those are printed. For those joining us online, of course, you can now go to sanlamtransformationgauge.co.za and you'll be able to print your report. Sorry, I can't give you a spekboom plant. But for those I can, I need you to look after it. And the deal is that next year, when you get invited here again, you have to take a picture of your spekboom plant on the morning you leave home, okay? That's the deal. Otherwise, I'm not letting you into the room. So you must take a picture of the spekboom plant next year, and you can show us how you've looked after it in the year. So ladies and gentlemen, other than lunch is going to be provided in the room next door. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a journey. I'm absolutely humbled by the support of everybody that's joining us online. Again, the last stat I had, Mr. Chairman, is 995. I don't know where the other 5 people are to get to a 1,000. But I'm absolutely humbled by the support of the leaders, captains of industry, male, female, black, white, young, old, for coming out today, for all the support I've received through the morning from the messages, that the team that's doing this, it feels like we're all kind of sharing this journey, BBEE Commissioner, that we can't let the foot off the pedal here. This is one of the most important policies we got to get right if we're going to achieve economic justice, and I'm going to steal that word. For me, BBEE is now economic justice. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Have a lovely day.
Imagine you lived your whole life in a single day. By breakfast, you'd be 18 and just finishing school. At mid-morning, you're 30 and hustling hard. By lunch, you're 40. Maybe you have kids that
Your
want
sneakers?
By 3 p.m., it's the big 5-0. The kids have moved out, and you say, freedom. Your parents say, we're moving in. I hope you planned for that. Before you know it, it's 8 o'clock, and hopefully, thanks to some smart investments, you can afford to put your feet up.